The sun hung low over Cedar Hollow like a judgment waiting to drop. Dust swirled through the main street, catching the last golden light before everything turned to shadow. It was the kind of evening that felt wrong, too quiet, too still, like the earth itself was holding its breath. Ilara Voss stood at the edge of the crowd and watched the town prepare to kill a man. She'd arrived in Cedar Hollow 3 days ago with nothing but a canvas bag, worn boots, and a past she didn't talk about. The stagecoach driver had looked at her like she was crazy when she'd asked to be let off here. Nothing in Cedar Hollow but hard ground and harder people, he'd said. She'd smiled and stepped down anyway. Now she was starting to think he'd been right. The crowd had gathered in the town square, if you could call it that. Really, it was just a wide patch of dirt between the general store and the saloon, with a hanging tree at the center that had seen too much use. Maybe 60 people stood in a rough half circle, their faces set like stone, men in dusty work clothes and women in faded dresses, all watching the same thing. A man standing under that tree with a rope around his neck. Ilara had seen lynch mobs before, back east, before everything fell apart, before she'd learned that starting over meant running until you found a place that didn't know your name. Mobs all had the same feel, that electric charge of people who'd made up their minds and didn't want to be confused with facts. But this felt different. The man under the tree wasn't begging, wasn't crying or shouting his innocence. He just stood there, hands tied behind his back, looking at nothing. Like he'd already left his body, and what remained was just waiting for everyone else to catch up. "String him up," someone shouted from the back. "Murderer! He killed them in cold blood." The voices piled on top of each other, each one feeding the next. Ilara watched the way the crowd leaned forward, hungry for it. She'd seen that before too, the way violence could become a kind of communion when people shared it. At the front of the mob stood a man who clearly ran things. He was tall, well-dressed for a frontier town, with silver in his hair and the kind of presence that made space around him. Even in anger, he carried himself like money and power were the same thing. "Caleb Rourke," the man said, his voice cutting through the noise like a knife. "You stand accused of murder, of burning down the Whitmore cabin with Henry and Martha still inside, of leaving their daughter an orphan. This town has spoken. We've heard enough." The crowd roared approval. Ilara studied the accused man, Caleb. He looked maybe 30, maybe older. Hard to tell with the way life out here aged people. Tall, lean in the way of someone who worked with his hands. Dark hair that needed cutting. A face that might have been handsome once, before whatever happened carved it hollow. He didn't look at the man speaking, didn't look at the crowd. His eyes were fixed on something in the middle distance that only he could see. "Any last words?" the silver-haired man asked. The crowd went quiet, waiting. Caleb's jaw worked for a moment. Then he spoke, his voice rough and low. "I didn't kill them." "Liar!" A woman pushed forward, her face twisted with grief. "We all know what you did. Everyone knows." "Your own brother saw you there," another voice called out. "Found you standing over the ashes." Caleb closed his eyes. For just a second, something moved across his face, pain maybe, or exhaustion so deep it had worn grooves in his bones. The silver-haired man, someone had called him Hale, Ilara thought, raised his hand. "Enough talking. We've wasted enough time on this. Marshal Cole, if you please." A badge-wearing man stepped forward, reaching for the rope. The crowd pressed closer, eager now that the end was coming. Ilara felt something twist in her chest. She didn't know this man, didn't know his story or whether he was guilty or innocent. She had no reason to care what happened to him, and every reason to keep her head down and stay out of it. Getting involved in other people's violence was how you ended up dead or worse. But she kept watching Caleb's face, kept seeing the way he stood there, not fighting, not running, just waiting. Like he'd already been dead for a while, and this was just making it official. The marshal threw the rope over the tree branch. Ilara moved without thinking. She pushed through the crowd, ignoring the shocked faces and angry mutters. Someone grabbed her arm. She shook them off, pushed past a wall of bodies until she was standing right there in the open space between the mob and the man they wanted to hang. "Stop." Her voice didn't sound like her own. Too steady, too sure. The marshal froze, rope in hand. The entire crowd went silent, staring at this strange woman who just walked into the middle of their justice. Hale's eyes narrowed. "Ma'am, you need to step back. This doesn't concern you." "I'm making it concern me," Alara said. "Are you out of your mind?" A woman's voice, sharp with disbelief. "That man's a killer." "Maybe," Alara said. She looked at Caleb for the first time since she'd stepped forward. He was staring at her now, confused and wary. "Maybe not, but you're going to kill him without a trial, without evidence, just because you're angry and scared and someone needs to pay." "We have evidence," Hale's voice rose. "We have witnesses." "You have accusations," Alara shot back. "That's not the same thing." The crowd was getting restless now, angry mutters rising like a building storm. Alara felt the danger of it, the way mob mentality could turn on anyone who broke the spell. She had maybe 30 seconds before someone decided she was part of the problem. "There's frontier law," she said, speaking quickly now. "I know it because I grew up with it. A woman can claim a condemned man as her husband and halt the execution. It's old, but it's still law, territorial law." Hale laughed, sharp and humorless. "That hasn't been invoked in 20 years. Doesn't mean it's not still valid." "You can't be serious." The marshal looked at her like she'd grown a second head. "You don't even know him." "I know enough," Alara lied. She turned to face Caleb fully. Up close she could see details she'd missed from the crowd, the way his hands shook just slightly despite his stillness, the hollowness in his eyes that went deeper than fear, something more like resignation, a scar along his jawline that looked old. "What's your name?" she asked quietly. He blinked at her. "What?" "Your name. I should know it if I'm going to marry you." Something flickered in his expression. Disbelief. Maybe a flash of dark humor. "Caleb Rourke." "Alara Voss." She held his gaze. "Do you accept?" "Why?" His voice was barely a whisper. "You don't know me. You don't know what they say I did." "I know what I see. A man standing still, not begging, not crying, just waiting." She paused. "That tells me something. It tells you I'm tired. Maybe, or maybe it tells me you've been carrying something too heavy for too long and you've run out of fight." She stepped closer, lowering her voice so only he could hear. "I'm offering you a chance. Take it or don't, but decide now." Behind her, the crowd was getting louder. Hale was saying something about legal precedent and frontier courts, and how this was insane. Caleb looked at her for a long moment. Whatever he was searching for in her face, she didn't know if he found it. But finally, he gave a tiny nod. "I accept." Alara spun back to face Hale in the crowd. "There, it's done. By territorial law, I claim this man as my husband. The execution is halted." "This is ridiculous." Hale's face was red now. "Marshal, you can't allow this." The marshal looked deeply uncomfortable. He glanced between Alara, Caleb, and the angry crowd like he was doing calculations in his head about which choice would get him killed. "She's right about the law," he said finally, reluctantly. "It's old, but it's on the books. Marriage claim halts execution pending review." "Review by who?" Hale demanded. "Territorial judge won't be through here for another month at least." "A month? You expect us to wait a month while this murderer walks free?" "He won't be free," the marshal said. "He'll be under watch, restricted to his property, and she'll be responsible for him." He looked at Alara. "You understand what that means? If he runs, you're accountable. If he commits another crime, you're complicit." Alara felt her heart hammering but kept her voice level. "I understand." "This is madness," someone in the crowd muttered. "Let them hang together then," another voice called out, but the moment had broken. That edge of violence that had held everything taut was starting to fray. People were talking instead of shouting. The marshal was moving between Alara and the crowd like a barrier. Hale stepped forward, his eyes cold. "You've made a mistake, Miss Voss, a serious mistake. That man is dangerous. He's killed before, and he'll kill again." "Then the judge will decide that," Alara said. "The judge?" Hale's smile was thin and sharp. "Yes, we'll see what the judge says. In the meantime, you've tied yourself to a murderer. Hope you sleep well at night." He turned and walked away. The crowd, losing its leader, began to disperse. Some people lingered, staring at Alara and Caleb with expressions ranging from confusion to disgust to something that might have been pity. The marshal cut the rope from Caleb's neck but left his hands tied. "I'll escort you both out of town. You've got until sunset to be gone. After that," he didn't finish the sentence. Caleb was still staring at Alara. "Why did you do that?" "I don't know," she admitted. And it was true, she didn't know. It had been impulse, instinct, something in her that couldn't watch another person get erased like they'd never mattered. "You just signed your death warrant," Caleb said quietly. "You know that, right? Being connected to me out here. It's a target on your back. Maybe I'm used to targets. You don't understand. Darius Hale, that man who was leading the mob, he owns half this valley. What he doesn't own, he controls. And he wants me dead." "Why?" Caleb looked away. "Long story. We've got a month until the judge comes. Plenty of time for long stories." The marshal cleared his throat. "If you two are done chatting, I'd like to get you out of town before someone changes their mind about letting you leave." They walked through Cedar Hollow in silence. Alara, Caleb, and the marshal. People watched from windows and doorways. A child asked his mother why the bad man wasn't hanging. The mother pulled him inside without answering. At the edge of town, where the road split between the valley and the mountains, the marshal stopped. He cut the rope from Caleb's wrists. "Your property is 8 miles that way," he said, pointing toward the mountains. "You know the way. I don't want to see you in town again until the judge arrives. Understood?" Caleb nodded. The marshal looked at Alara. "Last chance to change your mind. You can stay in town. No one will blame you for coming to your senses." Alara looked at the mountains, then at Caleb. He wasn't looking at her, was staring at the ground like he expected it to open up and swallow him. "I don't come to my senses that easily," she said. The marshal shook his head. "Your funeral." He walked back toward town without looking back. Alara and Caleb stood on the empty road as the sun sank lower. The mountains ahead were dark shapes against the fading sky. "I don't have a horse," Alara said. "Or supplies. I left everything at the boarding house." "It's gone by now," Caleb said. "Hale will have made sure of that." "Great. I've got a mule about half a mile from here. Hit it in case—" He trailed off. In case he escaped, Alara thought. Or in case there was an after. They walked in silence until they found the mule. An old gray thing that looked at them with deep suspicion. Caleb had some supplies tied to its back. Not much. Enough to survive maybe a few days if you were careful. "You should ride," Caleb said. "It's a rough walk." "We'll take turns." They started up the mountain road. The air got colder as they climbed, the light fading faster than seemed natural. Alara pulled her shawl tighter. "You really don't know what they accused me of?" Caleb asked after a while. "I heard them shouting, something about a fire, a couple who died. Henry and Martha Whitmore. They were my neighbors. Good people. Had a daughter, Emma. She's 8 now." His voice went flat. "Their cabin burned down 2 months ago. They were inside. Emma was at her grandmother's that night. Only reason she survived. And they think you did it. They know I did it, or they're sure enough it doesn't matter." "Did you?" Caleb stopped walking, turned to look at her fully. In the fading light, his face was half shadow. "If I say yes, you'll run. If I say no, you won't believe me. So what difference does it make?" "It makes a difference to me." "Why?" "You don't know me. You don't owe me anything. You just threw your life away for a stranger." "Maybe I'm tired of watching people get destroyed by crowds," Alara said. "Maybe I've seen too many people die for no good reason. Maybe—" She stopped, surprised by the sudden tightness in her throat. "Maybe I needed to do something that mattered." Caleb studied her face. "You running from something? Isn't everyone?" "Fair enough." He started walking again. "For what it's worth, I didn't set that fire. I didn't kill Henry and Martha, but I was there. I saw the smoke and ran to help, got there too late, found them already gone. That's what they saw, me standing there covered in ash, trying to pull bodies from the flames." "Why didn't you tell them that?" "I did. No one listened. Hale had already decided I was guilty." "Why would he want you to be guilty?" Caleb was quiet for a long time. They'd climbed high enough now that the town below was just scattered lights in the gathering dark. Because guilt means someone to blame, he said finally. And blame means people stop asking questions, stop looking for real answers. Hale needed this to be simple, needed me to be the monster. Otherwise, people might wonder who really started that fire. The words hung in the cold air between them. They walked through the night. The mountain road wound higher, narrower, until it was barely more than a track through rocks and scrub pine. The mule picked its way carefully, unconcerned with human drama. Alara's feet hurt, her legs burned. She wasn't used to this kind of terrain, this kind of cold. Back east, she'd been a seamstress. Spent her days inside, threading needles and fixing hems. This life, rough and exposed and dangerous, was as foreign to her as the moon. But she kept walking. "Tell me about your place," she said, more to keep herself moving than because she wanted to know. "It's not much. Cabin my grandfather built. 20 acres of rocks and stubborn grass. Some chickens if they haven't all been stolen. A creek that runs clear except when it doesn't." "Sounds perfect." Caleb glanced at her. "You're being sarcastic." "I'm being honest. I don't need much. Everyone needs more than what I've got. Try me." They crested a ridge and Alara saw it. The cabin. Small and dark against the mountainside, barely visible in the starlight. No lights burning, no smoke from the chimney. It looked abandoned, haunted. Caleb stopped, staring at it. "I haven't been back since they arrested me. 3 weeks in that cell, waiting for them to finish building the gallows." 3 weeks without a trial? Out here, the trial is whatever people say it is. They approached the cabin slowly. Caleb pushed the door open. It wasn't locked. Why would it be? No one would steal from a dead man's property. Bad luck. Inside was darkness. Caleb fumbled with flint and steel until a candle caught. The light showed a single room, maybe 15 feet square. A bed in one corner, a table, a stove, shelves that held a few dishes and supplies, everything covered in dust. "Home sweet home," Caleb said without inflection. Alara set down her bag, looked around at what would be her life now, this small, cold, dusty space in the mountains with a man she didn't know, and a town below that wanted them both gone. She should have been terrified, should have been questioning every choice that led her here. Instead, she felt something else, something that might have been relief, or purpose, or just the simple clarity that comes from burning your bridges so completely, there's no way back. "We'll need wood for the stove," she said, "and water from that creek you mentioned, and probably a dozen other things before this place is livable." Caleb was watching her with an expression she couldn't read. "You're really staying." "I married you. I'm staying." That wasn't a real marriage. That was legal maneuvering. Felt real enough when I said it. She met his eyes. "Look, I don't know you. You don't know me. Maybe you're a murderer. Maybe I'm crazy. Probably we'll both regret this before the month is out. But I made a choice back there, and I don't take back my choices. Even when they're stupid, especially then." Something shifted in Caleb's face. Not quite a smile, but close. The first crack in that armor of resignation he wore. "There's wood out back," he said. "Creek's about 100 yards down the slope. We can get water in the morning. Tonight." He looked around the dusty cabin. "Tonight we just try not to freeze." They worked in silence, getting the stove lit, clearing enough space to sleep. Caleb gave Alara the bed. "I'll take the floor, I'm used to it." But she insisted on sharing the blankets between them. Seemed only fair. As the stove's warmth slowly filled the small space, Alara lay in the dark and listened to Caleb's breathing. Steady, controlled, like a man who taught himself not to dream. "Alara," he said quietly. "Yeah? Thank you for what you did. Even if it was crazy. You're welcome. I still don't understand why." She thought about that, about all the reasons and non-reasons that had led her to this moment, about the life she'd left behind and the life she'd accidentally walked into. "Maybe some things don't need understanding," she said. "Maybe sometimes you just see someone about to fall off a cliff and you grab their hand. Not because you know them, not because you're sure they're worth saving, just because it's the right thing to do in that moment. And if they pull you off the cliff with them, then at least you're falling together." Caleb was quiet for a long time, then so soft she almost missed it. I didn't kill them. I believe you, Elara said. She wasn't sure if it was true, but she said it anyway, because he needed to hear it, because maybe belief was something you chose, not something you waited to be proven. Outside, the wind picked up, howling through the mountain pass. Inside, two strangers tried to sleep in a cabin that felt like the edge of the world. And somewhere down in the valley, Darius Hale sat in his comfortable house and planned what came next. The first morning came too fast and too cold. Elara woke to gray light filtering through gaps in the cabin walls and the sound of Caleb moving around outside. Her body ached in places she didn't know could ache. The floor had been harder than she'd expected, even with the blankets, and the cold had worked its way into her bones despite the stove. She sat up slowly, wincing. Through the small window, she could see Caleb by the creek, filling a bucket. He moved carefully, like someone expecting pain with every step. The cabin looked worse in daylight. What had been shadowy and mysterious last night was just dirty and broken now. The table had a crack running down the middle. Half the shelves were empty or sagging. There was a hole in the roof corner that someone had tried to patch with tin, but it had come loose. Water stains marked the wall beneath it. This was her home now. Elara stood and immediately stumbled, her legs stiff and reluctant. She caught herself on the table edge and stood there a moment, breathing through the ache. Then she started moving, because moving was better than thinking about what she'd done. By the time Caleb came back with the water, she'd gotten the stove going again and was sweeping the floor with a broom that was more handle than bristles. "You don't have to do that," he said, setting the bucket down. "Place needs cleaning." "I meant you don't have to stay. Now that it's light, you could walk back to town. Tell them you made a mistake. They'd probably let you go." Elara kept sweeping. "We did this already last night. I'm staying." "That was dark and you were tired. This is morning. Good time for second thoughts." "I don't do second thoughts." She looked at him. "Do you want me to leave?" Caleb ran a hand through his hair. He looked exhausted, like he hadn't slept at all. "I don't know what I want. I've been alone up here for 3 years. Got used to it. Then suddenly there's someone else, and I don't know how that works anymore. We'll figure it out as we go." "That's not much of a plan." "It's the only plan I've got." She dumped a pile of dust and dead leaves out the door. "You got any food in this place?" He showed her what supplies he had left. Not much. Some flour, salt, a few potatoes going soft. The chickens he'd mentioned were mostly gone. She could see feathers scattered in the yard where something had gotten them. Only 2 birds remained, skittish and hiding under the broken coop. "I had money saved," Caleb said. "Was going to go to town for supplies the day they arrested me. Now that money's probably gone too. Hale would have made sure of it. So we start from nothing." "Yeah." Elara looked around the property. 20 acres of rocks and stubborn grass, like he'd said. A vegetable patch that had gone to weeds. The broken chicken coop. A shed that looked one strong wind from collapse. "I can sew," she said. "That's what I did back east. If we can get fabric, I can make things to sell." "To who? Town won't buy from us." "There's other towns, other people, mountain folk who might not care about valley politics." Caleb was quiet, watching her. "You really think we can make this work?" "I think we can try. Or we can sit here and starve. Those are pretty much the options." Something that might have been respect crossed his face. "All right, let's try." They spent the day working. Caleb fixed what he could fix. The chicken coop, the worst holes in the cabin walls, the shed door that hung sideways on one hinge. Elara cleaned and organized, making lists in her head of what they needed and what they could do without. It was hard work, harder than she'd expected. Her hands weren't used to this kind of labor. By midday, she had blisters forming. By afternoon, they'd burst. She kept working anyway, wrapping her hands in scraps of cloth. Caleb noticed but didn't say anything. Psst. Just brought her water when she looked like she needed it and showed her where things were. They barely talked. The silence between them wasn't comfortable exactly, but it wasn't hostile either. More like 2 people learning to share space without stepping on each other. As the sun started to sink, Elara made something like dinner from the potatoes and a handful of wild onions she'd found growing near the creek. It wasn't good, but it was food. They ate at the cracked table, the single candle between them. "Tell me about the fire," Elara said. Caleb stopped chewing. "Why?" "Because if we're going to prove you didn't do it, I need to know what actually happened. Who says we're going to prove anything? Judge will come, hear what Hale tells him, and that'll be that. Not if we have evidence. We don't have evidence. We have my word against a whole town. Elara set down her fork. Then tell me your word. Let me decide if it's worth believing. Caleb stared at the candle flame for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and careful, like he was walking through a room full of broken glass. It was late. Maybe 10 at night. I was here, getting ready for bed. Then I smelled smoke. Not normal smoke, too thick, too chemical. I went outside and saw the glow coming from the Whitmore place. Ran down there fast as I could. How far? Half-mile. Down the slope and across the creek. He paused. When I got there, the cabin was already burning hard. Roof was going. I tried to get inside, but the heat pushed me back. I could hear them screaming. His hands clenched on the table. I tried 3 times to get in. Couldn't make it past the door. The smoke, the heat. I couldn't breathe. Couldn't see. 3rd time I went in, part of the roof came down. Nearly killed me. After that, I just stood there. Useless. Listening to them die. Elara watched his face, saw the way his jaw worked, the muscle jumping beneath the skin. When the roof finally collapsed, I went in to pull them out. Thought maybe, somehow, but they were already gone. I was dragging Henry's body out when Hale showed up with half the town. They saw me covered in ash holding a dead man, and that was all they needed to see. Did you tell them what you told me? Tried to. They weren't listening, kept asking why I was there so fast, why I was the only one who saw the fire, why there was lamp oil spilled near the door. Was there? Yeah, I saw it when I tried to get inside. Someone had poured it around the foundation, used it to make sure the fire caught fast and spread faster. But you didn't do it. Caleb met her eyes. No. Then who did? I don't know. That's the part that keeps me up at night. Someone killed Henry and Martha, murdered them in their sleep. And that same someone is walking around free while I get blamed for it. Elara thought about that. What about Hale? Why does he want you guilty so bad? That's complicated. We've got time. Caleb pushed his plate away. 3 years ago, my wife died. Anna. We'd been married 2 years. She got sick, fever that wouldn't break. By the time I got her down to the doctor in town, it was too late. She died in that boarding house room with me holding her hand and the doctor saying there was nothing more he could do. I'm sorry. After she died, I couldn't stay down there. Couldn't stand the noise, the people. So I came back up here. Stopped going to town except when I absolutely had to. People started calling me the hermit, the crazy mountain man. Fine by me. He stood and walked to the window, staring out at the darkening mountains. But before Anna died, we were trying to buy more land. Hale owned the parcels on either side of my property. Prime grazing land. He wanted to sell to me, said he'd give me a good price because Anna and his daughter were friends. We shook on it. Then Anna died and suddenly Hale changed his mind. Said the land wasn't for sale anymore. Said I couldn't be trusted to manage that much property on my own. And then the Whitmores died. Yeah. 2 months after I stopped asking about the land, the Whitmores died in a fire. Convenient, right? Makes people forget about property disputes when there's a murderer to hang. Elara processed that. You think Hale killed them to frame you? I think Hale wanted me gone. Dead or hanged doesn't matter to him. This way he gets my land when I'm executed, and he comes out looking like the hero who brought a killer to justice. That's a lot of effort for 20 acres of rocks. It's not about my 20 acres, it's about what's under them. Caleb turned to face her. There's copper in these mountains. Maybe silver, too. Mining companies have been sniffing around for years. Whoever controls the land controls the mineral rights. My 20 acres plus his parcels plus the Whitmore property? That's enough to make a deal with a mining company. That's real money. So he kills 2 people, frames you, and walks away rich. That's my theory. Can't prove it. But it fits. Elara stood and walked to where he stood. Then we find proof. How? We can't go to town, can't talk to anyone who might know something. We're stuck up here. There has to be something. Some piece of evidence that doesn't fit his story. Something he missed. Caleb shook his head. You've got more faith than I do. Someone has to. They stood in silence, watching night settle over the mountains. Somewhere down in the valley, lights were beginning to show. Cedar Hollow, getting ready for evening. A town that wanted them dead. The next 3 days passed in a blur of work. Alara had never worked this hard in her life. Her hands were a mess of blisters and calluses forming on top of blisters. Her back ached constantly. At night she fell into bed so exhausted she couldn't think, which was maybe a blessing. Caleb worked from first light until dark, fixing everything that could be fixed and improvising solutions for everything that couldn't. He was good with his hands, she noticed, could look at something broken and see how to make it work again. They were still learning each other, learning how to move around the same small space without collision, learning each other's rhythms and silences. Alara discovered that Caleb woke before dawn every morning and stood outside for exactly 10 minutes, just staring at the mountains. Discovered that he didn't talk before coffee. Discovered that he'd carved small wooden animals when Anna was alive and kept them in a box under the bed, but hadn't touched them since she died. Caleb discovered that Alara hummed while she worked. Discovered that she had nightmares sometimes that made her wake up gasping, but she never talked about them. Discovered that she could cook better than he could with almost nothing and make it taste like something. On the 4th morning, they had a visitor. Alara was outside trying to coax the 2 remaining chickens into trusting her when she heard the horse. She looked up to see a rider coming up the mountain path. A woman, alone, riding careful. Caleb came out of the shed, saw the rider, and tensed. "Who is it?" Alara asked. "Trouble, probably." But as the rider got closer, Caleb's expression shifted to surprise. "Margaret?" The woman dismounted before she reached the cabin. She was maybe 50, gray hair pulled back tight, dressed practically for riding. Her face was weathered but kind, with lines around her eyes that suggested she smiled more than she frowned. "Caleb Rourke," she said. "You're a hard man to kill." "Margaret Hayes, what are you doing up here?" "Bringing you supplies before you starve." She pulled 2 sacks off her saddle and handed them to Caleb. Flour, salt, sugar, coffee, some jerky, a few other things. Caleb stared at the sacks like he didn't know what to do with kindness. "You shouldn't have come. If Hale finds out, Hale can go to hell." Margaret turned to Alara. "And you must be the woman who stopped a hanging with nothing but nerve." "I'm Margaret Hayes. I run the boarding house in town. The real one, not that flea trap where Hale puts up his people." Alara Voss. "I know who you are. Whole town knows. Half of them think you're crazy. Other half think you're stupid. A few of us think you're brave." She smiled. "I'm in that last group." "Thank you for the supplies," Alara said. "We can pay you back when—" "Don't insult me. This is a gift." Margaret's expression turned serious. "But I didn't come just to bring food. I came to warn you. Hale's not sitting quiet. He's angry about what happened. Angry that you embarrassed him in front of the whole town." I didn't embarrass him. I just stopped a murder." "Same thing to a man like Hale. His pride is everything." Margaret glanced at Caleb. "He's been talking, saying that you 2 can't be allowed to just sit up here waiting for the judge, saying it's dangerous, saying something needs to be done." "Like what?" Caleb's voice was tight. "Don't know yet, but I know Hale. He doesn't forget and he doesn't forgive. You need to watch yourself up here." "We will," Alara said. Margaret studied her for a moment. "You really married him? Or was that just legal maneuvering?" "Both, I guess." "Either way, you tied yourself to a losing hand. You know that, right?" "Maybe. Maybe not." Margaret shook her head. "You got more spine than sense. Reminds me of myself 30 years ago." She moved to mount her horse, then paused. "There's one more thing. Emma Whitmore, the little girl whose parents died. She's been asking about the fire. Asking questions that make people uncomfortable." "What kind of questions?" Caleb asked. "Like why her pa would have been carrying his rifle inside at bedtime. Like why there was no lamp oil left in their shed when there should have been a full barrel. Like why she heard her ma talking about someone watching the house the week before it burned." Alara and Caleb exchanged glances. "She's 8 years old," Margaret continued, "living with her grandmother now. But she's smart, paying attention. And people are starting to get nervous about what she might remember or figure out." "Where is she?" Caleb asked. "Can we talk to her?" "You?" No, you show up asking questions about a little girl, and they'll have you back on the gallows by sunset. But maybe, she looked at Alara, maybe a woman could visit, a concerned neighbor checking on the orphan. No one would think twice about that. That's too risky, Caleb said. If anyone recognizes her, everyone in town knows what I look like now, Alara said. I can't just walk in pretending to be someone else. No, Margaret agreed, but you could come with me. As my guest. My niece, visiting from back east. I mention it casual-like that you're curious about the poor orphan girl, want to bring her a gift maybe. Not suspicious, just Christian charity. The word hung in the air for a moment before Margaret caught herself. Sorry, force of habit. Good intentions, whatever you want to call it. Caleb shook his head. It's too dangerous. It's also our only lead, Alara said. If Emma knows something, saw something that doesn't match Hale's story, that could be everything. Or it could get you killed. Living up here could get us killed. At least this way we're doing something. They argued about it while Margaret waited patiently on her horse. Finally, Caleb gave in with obvious reluctance. When? He asked Margaret. Tomorrow. Sunday. Most folks will be at services. Emma's grandmother doesn't go anymore. Not since the fire. Good time to visit. I don't like this, Caleb said. You don't have to like it, Alara told him. You just have to let me try. After Margaret left, they barely spoke for the rest of the day. Caleb worked with an intensity that felt like anger, fixing the shed roof like it had personally offended him. Alara knew he was worried, knew he was scared for her, but there was nothing to say that would make it better. That night, lying in the dark, she heard him speak. My brother was there that night, at the hanging. Alara rolled over to face his direction. I didn't know you had a brother. Marcus, younger by 2 years. He's the one who told everyone he saw me at the fire. Said he was riding home late and saw me standing over the bodies. Did he? Yeah, he saw me there. But he didn't see me start it because I didn't. We haven't spoken since. He thinks I killed them. Or he's pretending to think that because it's easier than admitting he might be wrong. Why would he lie? I don't think he's lying. I think he believes what he saw. But belief isn't the same as truth. Alara thought about that. Will he talk to me? If I can get to him? No, he's decided I'm guilty. Nothing you say will change that. Caleb was quiet for a moment. Be careful tomorrow. Hale's dangerous, but he's not the only danger in that town. People get strange when they've convinced themselves of something. They'll do things to protect that certainty that they'd never do otherwise. I'll be careful. Promise me. If it feels wrong, if anything seems off, you leave. You run. Don't try to be brave. I promise. But even as she said it, Alara knew it was a lie. She'd come too far to run now. Whatever happened tomorrow in Cedar Hollow, she'd see it through. Morning came cold and clear. Margaret arrived just after dawn with a dress for Alara, something more presentable than the worn travel clothes she'd been living in. It was blue, simple, but clean, the kind of thing a respectable woman would wear to visit the sick or grieving. Here, Margaret said, handing it over. My daughter's. She moved to California 3 years ago. Won't miss it. Alara changed inside while Caleb and Margaret waited outside. The dress fit well enough, made her look like someone different, someone safe. Caleb watched her emerge with an expression she couldn't read. You look like a different person, he said. That's the idea. I still don't like this. I know. She touched his arm briefly. I'll be back before dark. You better be. The ride down to Cedar Hollow took 2 hours. Margaret filled the silence with talk about the town, about who was who and what they believed. Alara tried to memorize it all, the shifting alliances, the old grudges, the way power flowed through Cedar Hollow like water finding its level. Hale owns the bank, Margaret explained, which means he owns anyone with a loan. That's most of the town. Cross him, and suddenly your loan comes due. Your credit disappears, your business fails. How does he not own you? Because I don't owe him anything. Bought my boarding house with cash from my late husband's life insurance. Haley tried to buy me out twice. I told him to go to hell both times. She smiled grimly. He can't touch me without looking petty. But he makes things difficult when he can. They came into town through the back way, avoiding the main street. Margaret's boarding house was a 2-story building on the edge of town, painted white with a wide porch. It looked clean and welcoming, the kind of place you'd want to stay if you didn't have anywhere else to go. Inside, Margaret had Elara wait in a back room while she went to prepare for the visit. Through the window, Elara could see the main street. Sunday morning. Quiet. Most people were at church like Margaret had said, but not everyone. She saw a man standing across the street watching the boarding house. Young, hard-faced, wearing a deputy's badge. When Margaret came back, Elara pointed him out. "That's Riley," Margaret said. "Hale's nephew. Marshall made him a deputy last year. He's been watching my place since the hanging. Hale's orders, probably. So he knows I'm here. He knows someone's here, but he won't recognize you in that dress. Just keep your head down and don't look directly at him." They left through the front door like they had nothing to hide. Margaret introduced Elara to a neighbor as her niece from St. Louis, visiting for a few weeks. The neighbor smiled and welcomed her and didn't ask any questions. Emma Whitmore's grandmother lived 3 streets over in a small house with a brown fence. The yard was tidy but sad-looking, like someone was maintaining it out of obligation rather than joy. Margaret knocked. After a moment, an older woman answered. She looked tired, worn down by grief. Her eyes were red-rimmed. "Margaret," she said, "I wasn't expecting you." "I know, Helen. I hope you don't mind. My niece is visiting from back east, and she wanted to meet Emma. She lost her own parents young and thought maybe she could talk to the girl, share some understanding." It was a good lie. Simple. Believable. Helen hesitated, then opened the door wider. "Emma's in the back room. She's been quiet lately, barely talks. Maybe it would do her good to talk to someone new." They went inside. The house was dark, curtains drawn against the sunlight. It smelled like old flowers and sadness. Emma was sitting on the floor of a back bedroom, surrounded by drawings. She looked up when they entered, a small girl with dark hair and serious eyes that seemed too old for her face. "Emma, sweetie," Helen said, "this is Mrs. Hayes from the boarding house and her niece from St. Louis. They came to visit you." Emma studied Elara with an intensity that was almost uncomfortable. "Hello," Elara said, kneeling down to the girl's level. "I'm Elara. Your grandmother said you like to draw." Emma nodded but didn't speak. Margaret and Helen moved into the other room, giving them privacy. Elara sat on the floor across from Emma and looked at the drawings spread around them. They were all of the same thing, a house burning, flames reaching into a dark sky, 2 figures visible in a window. "You draw what you remember," Elara said softly. Emma nodded again. "Can you tell me about that night, about what you remember?" For a long moment, Emma just stared at her, then quietly, "You're her." The lady who stopped them from hanging Mr. Rourke. Elara's heart skipped. "How did you—" "Everyone talks. I listen." Emma picked up one of her drawings. "They say he killed my mama and papa, but he didn't." "How do you know?" "Because I saw who did." The words fell into the quiet room like stones into still water. Elara leaned closer. "Emma, this is important. Can you tell me what you saw?" Emma set down the drawing and picked up another one. This one was different. It showed the house before it burned, with a figure standing near it in the darkness. The figure was just a dark shape, no features, but Emma had drawn something distinctive, a hat with a wide brim, and in the figure's hand something that looked like a can. "I wasn't supposed to be there," Emma whispered. "Grandma thought I was sleeping at her house. But I snuck out, wanted to go home and get my doll. I saw him by our house. He didn't see me. I hid behind the woodpile and watched. He poured something on the ground all around the walls. Then he lit it. I wanted to scream, but I was too scared. I just hid there and watched it burn." Tears were running down her face now. "I tried to tell them, after, but no one would listen. They said I was confused, said it was dark and I was scared and I didn't see what I thought I saw. They said Mr. Rourke did it, and I must have seen him, but I didn't. It wasn't him. He came after. He tried to save them." Elara's hands were shaking. "Emma, this is very important. Did you recognize the person you saw, the one who started the fire?" Emma shook her head. "It was too dark, and the hat covered his face, but I know it wasn't Mr. Rourke because Mr. Rourke doesn't wear a hat like that. Mr. Rourke wears a wool cap. Mama always said it made him look silly." "What kind of hat was it?" "Like the fancy ones, like Mr. Hale wears when he comes to town on business days." The room felt very cold suddenly. "Did you tell anyone this? About the hat?" I told Grandma. I told the marshal. They said I was making things up because I was sad. They said memories get mixed up when bad things happen. But I know what I saw. Alara believed her. Everything about this girl said she was telling the truth, but belief wasn't evidence. It wasn't proof. And it wasn't enough to overturn a town's conviction. Emma, she said carefully, would you be willing to tell this to a judge when he comes to town? Fear crossed Emma's face. They won't believe me. They didn't before. They might if you have someone standing with you, someone who believes you. Will you stand with me? Yes, I will. Emma studied her face for a long moment. Then she nodded. Okay, I'll tell the judge, but you have to promise something. What? You have to keep Mr. Rourke safe until the judge comes, because if Mr. Hale finds out I'm going to tell, he'll make sure there's no one left to hear it. The words were so matter-of-fact, so certain, that they made Alara's blood run cold. This 8-year-old girl understood exactly how dangerous the truth was. I promise, Alara said. We'll be careful. They talked for a few more minutes, but there was nothing else Emma could tell her. She hadn't seen the man's face, hadn't heard him speak. All she had was the memory of a wide-brimmed hat and the smell of lamp oil and the sight of her home burning with her parents inside. When Margaret came to collect Alara, she must have seen something in her face because she didn't ask questions until they were outside. You learned something, Margaret said. Emma saw who started the fire. It wasn't Caleb. Did she identify them? No, but she described a hat, the kind Hale wears. Margaret was quiet for a long moment. That's not enough. Description of a hat? Any lawyer would tear that apart. Any jury would dismiss it. She's 8 years old and traumatized. They'll say she's confused. I know, but it's something. It's a thread. If we pull on it, maybe we find more. They walked back toward the boarding house carefully, keeping to quiet streets. But as they turned the corner, they nearly walked straight into Deputy Riley. He stood in their path, hand resting on his gun belt, eyes sharp. Mrs. Hayes, he said. And who's this? My niece, Margaret said smoothly. Visiting from St. Louis. Riley looked at Alara for a long, uncomfortable moment. St. Louis. Long way to come. Family's worth traveling for, Alara said, keeping her voice light. What's your name, miss? Sarah. Sarah Hayes. Funny. Mrs. Hayes told my uncle her niece's name was Clara. Alara's stomach dropped. Margaret had told her what name to use, but in the moment she'd forgotten, panicked, given a different one. Did I? Margaret asked, her voice unconcerned. Must have been thinking of my other niece. I've got 3, you know. Hard to keep track sometimes. Riley smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Must be. Where you staying, Sarah? With my aunt, at the boarding house. How long you planning to be in town? A few weeks, maybe. Huh. He stepped closer. You know what's funny? You look awful familiar. Like maybe I've seen you before. Maybe 4 days ago. Maybe at a hanging that got interrupted. I've never been to a hanging, Alara said. No, because I'm pretty sure... Riley, Margaret interrupted, her voice sharp now. Are you accusing my niece of something? Because if you are, you'd better have evidence. Otherwise, you're just harassing an innocent woman. I'm sure your uncle wouldn't appreciate you causing trouble with a visitor. Riley's jaw tightened. Just being thorough, Mrs. Hayes. A lot of strangers coming through town lately. Got to keep track. Well, you've kept track. Now, if you'll excuse us. Margaret moved past him, pulling Alara with her. They walked with measured steps, not too fast, not too slow. Behind them, Riley didn't move. Alara could feel his eyes on her back. Don't look back, Margaret murmured. They made it to the boarding house without incident. Inside, Margaret shut the door and locked it. That was close, she said. He recognized me. Maybe. Or maybe he's just suspicious. Either way, you can't stay in town. We need to get you back to the mountain before he talks to Hale. They left within the hour, taking the back way out of town. Alara changed back into her regular clothes, and Margaret burned the blue dress in her stove. Couldn't risk anyone finding it. The ride back up the mountain felt longer than it had coming down. Alara kept expecting to hear hoofbeats behind them, to see Riley and a group of men coming to finish what they'd started 4 days ago. But the trail stayed empty. Caleb was waiting outside the cabin when they arrived. He looked like he'd been pacing for hours. When he saw Alara, The relief on his face was so naked it hurt to look at. "You're okay," he said. "I'm okay." Margaret didn't linger. "I'll try to come again in a few days, but be careful. Something's shifting down there. I can feel it." After she left, Alara told Caleb everything. About Emma, about the hat, about Riley recognizing her. When she finished, Caleb was quiet for a long time. "This doesn't prove anything," he said finally. "I know. The word of an 8-year-old against Hale, they'll never accept it. Maybe not, but at least now we know the truth. Emma saw what really happened. She's a witness. She's a target." Caleb's voice was hard. "If Hale finds out she's planning to talk to the judge, he'll make sure she can't. He's already killed 2 people. What's one more?" The thought made Alara sick. "We have to protect her." "How? We can't even protect ourselves." "I don't know yet, but we'll figure something out." Caleb looked at her, and for the first time since she'd met him, she saw something other than resignation in his eyes. Hope, maybe. Or determination, or just the simple realization that he wasn't alone anymore. "You're either the bravest person I've ever met," he said, "or the most foolish." "Probably both." That night, they sat by the stove and talked until the fire burned low. Not about the trial or Hale or the danger waiting down in Cedar Hollow, just about small things, about lives they'd had before, about the people they used to be. Alara learned that Caleb had wanted to be a teacher once, had loved books and learning. But life on the frontier didn't leave much room for teaching, so he'd become a farmer instead. Caleb learned that Alara had been married before too, briefly, to a man who'd turned mean after the wedding, who'd used his fists to make his points. She'd left him in the middle of the night with nothing but what she could carry. Never looked back. "That why you're out here?" Caleb asked. "Running from him?" "He's dead now. Drank himself into the grave 2 years ago." "But yeah, that's how I learned to run. Once you start, it gets easier. Easier to keep moving than to stay and fight." "But you stopped running. You stopped for me." "I didn't stop. I just ran into something worth standing still for." Outside, the wind picked up, carrying the smell of coming snow. Winter wasn't far off. They'd need more supplies, more firewood, more everything. But for now, in this moment, they were warm and safe and together. It would have to be enough. 3 days after Alara's visit to town, the first threat arrived. She found it nailed to the cabin door at dawn, a piece of paper with words scrawled in rough handwriting. "Leave or burn like the Whitmores." Caleb tore it down before she could read it twice, crumpled it, threw it in the stove. But the message had already wormed its way under her skin. "They're trying to scare us," he said. "It's working." "Don't let it. That's what they want. They want us panicked and running." "Maybe running would be smart." Caleb looked at her sharply. "You don't mean that." She didn't, but the fear was real, sitting in her stomach like a stone. Someone had come up here in the dark, close enough to touch their door, and left a promise of violence. That same someone could come back, could finish what they'd started with the Whitmores. "We should set up watches," Caleb said. "Take turns through the night. Anyone comes up that path, we'll see them." So they started sleeping in shifts, 2 hours on, 2 hours off, through the long mountain nights. It was exhausting. By the 4th day, Alara was so tired she could barely think straight, but every time she closed her eyes, she saw flames. The second message came 3 days after the first. This one was more direct. "Final warning, leave by Sunday or we'll make you leave." Sunday was 4 days away. "We need to tell Margaret," Alara said. "Maybe she can talk to the marshal. Get him to do something." "Marshal won't help. He's scared of Hale, same as everyone else." "Then we need to prepare. Set traps on the path. Block the door at night. Something." They spent the next day making the cabin as defensible as they could. Caleb rigged a bell system with wire and tin cans that would rattle if anyone came up the main path. He moved heavy furniture against the door at night. He even dug out an old rifle from under the floorboards, unloaded because he hadn't had bullets in months, but maybe it would be enough to scare someone off. "You know how to shoot?" he asked Alara. "No." "I'll teach you, just in case." They spent an afternoon with the empty rifle, Caleb showing her how to hold it, how to aim, how to breathe before pulling a trigger they didn't have ammunition for. It felt absurd and necessary at the same time. "If it comes to it," Caleb said quietly, "you run. You hear me? You don't try to be brave. You just run into the woods and keep going until you hit the next valley. What about you? I'll be fine. That's a lie. Yeah, but you run anyway. Saturday came with dark clouds building over the mountains. The air felt heavy, electric, like the world was holding its breath before a storm. Caleb spent the day checking and rechecking their defenses. Alara tried to work but couldn't focus. Every sound made her jump. Every shadow looked like a threat. When Margaret arrived mid-afternoon, they both nearly shot her with an unloaded rifle. "Easy," she called out, hands up. "It's just me." They let her in quickly, scanning the trail behind her for anyone following. "You look terrible," Margaret said bluntly. "Both of you." "We've had better weeks," Caleb muttered. Margaret set down a sack of supplies. "I came to warn you, Hale's planning something for tomorrow. I don't know what exactly, but he's been gathering men, talking about taking matters into his own hands since the law won't act." "How many men?" Caleb asked. "Maybe a dozen, maybe more. Hard to say. Some of them are just talk, but some—" She shook her head. "Some of them want blood. They're scared and angry and convinced you're a danger to the whole town." "What does he want?" Alara asked. "What's the end game here?" "He wants you gone. Dead, run off, doesn't matter. As long as you're not here when the judge arrives. Without you two, there's no case. No questions. Just a dead murderer and a town that can move on." "We should leave," Alara said. "Go to the next town. Find the territorial judge ourselves. Tell him what Emma said." "Won't work," Margaret said. "Judge is already on his way here. He's due in Cedar Hollow in 2 weeks. If you run now, Hale will tell everyone you fled because you were guilty. He'll spin it so tight you'll never untangle it. So we stay and wait to die." "No, you stay and you fight. But smart, not stupid." Margaret pulled something from her coat, a small pistol, and a box of ammunition. "This is all I could get without drawing attention. It's not much, but it's better than nothing." Caleb took the gun like it might bite him. "Margaret, if Hale finds out you helped us—" "Then he finds out. I'm tired of watching bad men win because good people are too scared to stand up." She looked between them. "You've got one advantage. Hale thinks you're helpless up here, thinks you'll just wait for him to come. So don't wait. Do something he doesn't expect." "Like what?" Alara asked. "I don't know. You're the ones who stopped a hanging with nothing but words. Figure it out." After Margaret left, they sat in silence as the afternoon darkened into evening. The storm was getting closer. Alara could smell rain on the wind. "She's right," Caleb said finally. "We can't just sit here." "What are you thinking?" "I'm thinking we need leverage. Something that makes Hale back off." "We don't have anything he wants." "No, but we have something he doesn't want anyone to see." Caleb stood and started pacing. "The fire. The night the Whitmores died. There has to be evidence still there. Something that proves it wasn't me." "Caleb, that was 2 months ago. The cabin burned to nothing. What could possibly be left?" "I don't know, but it's worth looking. And if we're going to do it, we need to do it tonight, before Hale makes his move." "That's crazy. It's going to storm. It'll be pitch dark. And the Whitmore property is right in the middle of the valley. If anyone sees us, then they see us. But if we sit here doing nothing, we're already dead." Alara wanted to argue, wanted to tell him it was too risky, too dangerous, too everything. But she looked at his face and saw something she hadn't seen before. Not resignation, not hopelessness, determination. "All right," she said. "We go tonight." They left just after midnight when the storm finally broke. Rain came down in sheets, turning the mountain path into a river of mud. It was miserable and cold and nearly impossible to see, but it also meant no one else would be out. No one would see them making their way down to the valley. The Whitmore property was dark and abandoned. The burned cabin was just a black skeleton against the stormy sky, charred timbers reaching up like broken bones. Even 2 months later, Alara could smell the ash. "Where do we start?" she asked, rain running down her face. "The foundation, where the fire started." Caleb moved carefully through the ruins, stepping over debris. Emma said she saw someone pouring lamp oil around the walls. If it was lamp oil, there might still be traces. Might be able to prove it was arson. They searched by lightning flash, picking through what remained, Most of it was just ash and charred wood, nails, broken glass, the metal frame of a bed. Nothing that looked like evidence. Alara was about to suggest they give up when her foot caught on something. She looked down and saw it half buried in mud and ash. A metal can. Small, dented, with traces of something dark staining the inside. "Caleb," she called. He came over, picked it up, sniffed it. "Lamp oil. This wasn't theirs. The Whitmores kept their oil in big barrels in the shed. This is the kind you buy from the general store in town." "So someone brought it here specifically to start the fire?" "Yeah." He turned the can over in his hands. "But that's not proof. Anyone could have bought this. Anyone could have carried it here." "Wait." Alara pointed at the can. In the lightning flash, she'd seen something. "There! On the side!" Caleb angled it to catch the next flash of light. Stamped into the metal were 2 letters. D.H. They stared at it. "Darius Hale," Alara whispered. "Or anyone with those initials. How many people in Cedar Hollow have those initials and also want you dead?" Caleb didn't answer. He just wrapped the can in cloth and tucked it inside his coat. They were about to leave when Alara saw something else. A piece of paper, somehow protected under a piece of fallen roofing. She picked it up carefully. It was water-damaged and partially burned, but she could still make out writing. A letter, addressed to Henry Whitmore. She couldn't read most of it in the dark and rain, but she caught fragments. "Mineral survey, copper deposits, offer stands until D. Hale." "Caleb, look at this." He read it over her shoulder. Hale was trying to buy the Whitmore property. Henry must have said no. And 2 weeks later, his cabin burns down with him in it. They stood in the rain, pieces of a terrible picture forming between them. Hale wanted the land. Henry wouldn't sell. So Hale made sure the land became available another way. "We need to take this to the judge," Alara said. "The can, the letter, Emma's testimony, put it all together and maybe—" She never finished the sentence. Light bloomed in the darkness. Torches. Multiple torches, coming up the valley road toward them. "Run," Caleb said. They ran. Behind them voices shouted. Men on horses, moving fast. Alara's legs pumped, boots sliding in the mud, lungs burning. Caleb was ahead of her, pulling her along when she stumbled. They made it to the tree line before the first shot rang out. The bullet hit a tree trunk next to Alara's head, spraying bark. She didn't scream, just ran harder, deeper into the woods where the horses couldn't follow. More shots. More voices. The storm muffled everything, turned it into chaos. Alara lost track of the direction, just followed Caleb's back as he crashed through underbrush. They ran until they couldn't hear pursuit anymore. Ran until Alara's legs gave out and she collapsed against a tree, gasping. Caleb bent double next to her, coughing. "Did they see us?" she managed. "Don't know. Maybe. Probably." "The cabin." "Forget the cabin. We can't go back there. If they saw us, that's the first place they'll look." "Then where?" Caleb looked around, getting his bearings. "There's an old mining camp about 3 miles north. Been abandoned for years. We can shelter there until the storm passes. Figure out what to do next." They walked through the rain and darkness for what felt like hours. Alara was shaking, soaked through, so tired she could barely put one foot in front of the other. But she kept moving because stopping meant dying. The mining camp was exactly as advertised, abandoned. Just a few collapsed structures and a mine entrance boarded up with rotting wood. But one of the structures still had most of a roof. It would have to do. Inside, out of the rain at last, they collapsed. Caleb tried to get a fire going, but everything was too wet. They sat in the dark, shivering, listening to the storm rage outside. "Do you still have the can?" Alara asked through chattering teeth. Caleb patted his coat. "Yeah." "And you got the letter?" She checked. The paper was a soggy mess now, barely holding together, but the writing was still visible. Barely. "I've got it." Then it wasn't for nothing. They sat in silence for a while. Alara's mind was racing. They'd found evidence, real evidence that Hale had motive and means, but they'd also been seen, chased, shot at. Everything was unraveling faster than she could track. "What do we do now?" she asked. "We survive until morning. Then we figure out how to get this to the judge." The judge isn't here for 2 weeks. "Then we hide for 2 weeks." "Where?" "They'll search everywhere. And Margaret, if they saw us, they'll know she helped us. They'll go after her too. Caleb's jaw tightened. One problem at a time. But Alara could see it in his face. He knew they were trapped, knew that finding evidence had only made things worse because now Hale would be desperate to silence them before they could use it. The storm finally broke near dawn. Alara had dozed fitfully, jerking awake at every sound. When gray light started filtering through the cracks in the walls, she saw Caleb hadn't slept at all. He was sitting against the wall, the pistol in his lap, watching the door. "We should move," he said. "Can't stay here." "Where to?" "Higher. There's country up in the peaks where even Hale's men won't follow. We can survive there. Wait him out." "For 2 weeks? In the mountains?" "Caleb, it's the only option we've got." Alara wanted to argue, but couldn't find the words. He was right. Going back to the cabin meant walking into an ambush. Going to town meant hanging. Their only choice was up. They started climbing as the sun rose. The storm had left everything slick and treacherous. Alara's hands were raw from grabbing rocks and branches to pull herself along. Her boots were falling apart, but she climbed. By midday, they were high enough to see the whole valley spread below. Cedar Hollow looked tiny from up here. Peaceful, even. Hard to believe it was full of people who wanted them dead. "Look," Caleb said, pointing. Down on the valley floor, she could see movement. Riders, a lot of them, spreading out in a search pattern. "They're hunting us, sir," Alara said. "Yeah, but they're looking in the wrong place. They're searching around the Whitmore property and the cabin. Haven't come up this far yet." "They will eventually." "Maybe, but we'll be long gone by then." They kept climbing. The air got thinner, colder. Alara's breath came in ragged gasps. Her vision started to blur at the edges. She wasn't built for this, wasn't strong enough or tough enough or anything enough, but she kept climbing anyway. Caleb found them shelter just before dark, a cave, shallow but dry, hidden behind a waterfall. The water was runoff from the storm, would probably dry up in a day or two, but for now it provided cover. No one would see them behind that curtain of water. Inside, they finally let themselves stop. Alara collapsed onto the stone floor and didn't move. Every muscle screamed. Her feet were bleeding. She'd lost her shawl somewhere on the climb and the cold was seeping into her bones. Caleb managed to get a small fire going with dry wood from the back of the cave. The warmth was barely enough to matter, but it was something. "We can't keep running forever," Alara said. "I know. Even if we hide for 2 weeks, what then? We show up for the trial with a dented can and a ruined letter? That's not enough. Hale will have a story. He'll have witnesses. He'll make us look like criminals who destroyed evidence and fled." "So what do you suggest?" Alara closed her eyes. She was so tired, too tired to think, but somewhere in the exhaustion, an idea was forming. Reckless and probably stupid, but it was all she had. "We don't hide," she said. "We attack." Caleb looked at her like she'd lost her mind. "Attack Hale? With what? We've got 1 gun and 6 bullets. Not with guns, with truth. We go to the town. We make them listen. They'll hang us before we get 2 words out. Not if we do it right. Not if we have leverage." She sat up, wincing. "Margaret said the judge is coming in 2 weeks. That means Hale has 2 weeks to make sure we're not there to testify. He's desperate. Desperate people make mistakes." "What kind of mistakes?" "I don't know yet. But if we can force his hand, make him act in public instead of in secret, maybe people will see what he really is." Caleb was quiet for a long time, staring into the fire. "That's a terrible plan." "You have a better one?" "No, but I don't like it." "Neither do I, but it's what we've got." They spent the next day in the cave, planning, or trying to plan. It was hard to make strategy when you were cold and hungry and hurt, but they worked through it, piece by piece. The key was Emma. Her testimony was the strongest thing they had. If they could get her in front of the judge, in front of the whole town, and have her tell what she saw, it might be enough to crack Hale's story. But Emma was a child, vulnerable. Hale knew she was a threat. They had to assume he was watching her, waiting for any sign that she might talk. "Margaret can protect her," Caleb said. "Take her into the boarding house. Keep her safe until the judge comes." "Maybe, if Margaret hasn't already been arrested for helping us. We need to know what's happening down there, need intelligence. So one of us goes down, Tonight. Scout the situation. I'll go, Caleb said immediately. No, they're looking for you. Everyone knows your face, but me, in the dark, keeping to shadows? She shook her head. I can do it. Absolutely not. Caleb, think. You're wanted for murder. I'm just wanted for stupidity. If I get caught, they'll probably just run me out of town. If you get caught, you hang. Which is exactly why I should be the one taking the risk. No. It's exactly why I should. They argued about it until Alara finally pulled rank. I saved your life. You owe me. So you're going to let me do this my way. Caleb looked like he wanted to argue more, but he didn't, just nodded reluctantly. You see anything wrong, anything at all, you run. Promise me. I promise. She left after dark, making her way down the mountain by starlight. It was terrifying and exhilarating at the same time. Every shadow could hide a hunter. Every sound could be pursuit. But she moved quiet and careful, and nothing stopped her. Cedar Hollow was restless. Even from a distance, Alara could see unusual activity, lights burning late, people in the streets when they should have been home. Something had the town stirred up. She circled around to the back of Margaret's boarding house, approached through the garden, tapped on the window they'd agreed would be the signal. For a long moment, nothing. Then the curtain shifted and Margaret's face appeared. Her eyes went wide. She opened the window. Are you insane? They're looking everywhere for you. I know. I need to know what's happening. What have you heard? Margaret glanced back into the house, then leaned closer. Hale's telling everyone you and Caleb attacked him at the Whitmore property. Says you threatened him with a gun. Says you destroyed evidence. The whole town's in an uproar. He's got everyone convinced you're dangerous. That's a lie. We were just looking for evidence. We didn't even see him. Doesn't matter. He's got witnesses backing his story. Riley and 3 other men, all swearing they saw you threaten Hale's life. Alara's stomach sank. What about Emma? Is she safe? For now. She's still with her grandmother, but Hale's been asking questions, wants to know if she's said anything unusual. Helen's scared. I can see it. Can you take Emma? Keep her at the boarding house until the judge comes? Margaret hesitated. If I do that, Hale will know something's wrong. He'll move against us before the judge gets here. Then what do we do? I don't know. But you can't stay here. If anyone sees you... A sound from inside the house. Footsteps. Margaret's face went pale. Go, she hissed. Now! Alara dropped from the window and ran, heart hammering. Behind her she heard voices, shouting. Someone had seen her. She made it to the edge of town before they got organized. Made it to the tree line before the first shots rang out. Made it back up the mountain through sheer terror and adrenaline. Caleb was waiting at the cave entrance, gun drawn. When he saw it was her, the relief on his face was overwhelming. I heard shots. Thought, I'm okay, but we've got a problem. She told him everything. Hale's lies, the false witnesses, the danger to Emma. When she finished, Caleb looked like he wanted to break something. He's cornering us, cutting off every option. Not every option. Alara pulled out the oil can they'd found, the soggy letter. We still have this, and we still have the truth. We just need a way to make people hear it. How? We can't even get within a mile of town without getting shot at. Alara thought about it, about Hale's desperation, about the way he was working so hard to control the narrative, about what it meant that he was lying so aggressively. It meant he was scared. The judge, she said slowly. When is he supposed to arrive? 2 weeks. Margaret said 2 weeks. What if we move up the timeline? What if we bring the judge here ourselves? Caleb frowned. How would we even find him? He could be anywhere between here and the territorial capital. The stagecoach line. Judges travel by stage. There's a route that runs through these mountains. If we can intercept him, tell him what's happening, maybe he'll come early. That's a huge maybe. It's all we've got. They spent the rest of the night working out the details. The stagecoach ran every 3 days. The next one was due to pass through the mountain route tomorrow evening. If they could get to the stage stop, if they could get the judge's attention, if they could convince him to come to Cedar Hollow ahead of schedule. Too many ifs. But it was a plan. At dawn, they started down the mountain. Not toward Cedar Hollow this time, but east toward the stage route. It was rough country, all rocks and steep drops, but they made it by late afternoon to the small way station where the stage stopped to change horses. The station keeper was an old man who looked at them with suspicion. You two look like you've been through hell. Something like that, Caleb said. Is the judge on today's stage? Judge? What judge? Territorial judge. Should be heading to Cedar Hollow. The old man spat tobacco juice. Don't know nothing about no judge. Stage today's just carrying mail and a couple passengers. Alara's heart sank. They'd gambled everything on this. If the judge wasn't on this stage, they'd have to wait 3 more days. 3 days they didn't have. When's the next stage? She asked. 3 days from now. And the one after that? Another 3 days? They were running out of time, running out of options, running out of everything. The stage arrived at dusk, pulled by 4 tired horses. 2 passengers climbed out to stretch their legs while the horses were changed. A merchant and a woman in traveling clothes. Not a judge. Alara wanted to scream, wanted to cry, but she just stood there, watching their last hope roll away into the gathering dark. Now what? Caleb asked quietly. Before Alara could answer, the woman in traveling clothes walked over to them. Excuse me, I couldn't help but overhear you asking about a judge. Yes, Alara said. We're looking for the territorial judge. He's supposed to be coming to Cedar Hollow. The woman studied them both carefully. I'm Judge Sarah Winters, and I was planning to be in Cedar Hollow 2 weeks from now. But something tells me I should hear your story sooner rather than later. Alara stared at the woman, certain she'd misheard. You're the judge? I am. Judge Winters was maybe 45, with gray streaking her dark hair and eyes that missed nothing. She didn't look like any judge Alara had ever imagined. No robes, no formal bearing. Just a woman in travel clothes who carried herself like she'd seen enough of the world to stop being surprised by it. Caleb found his voice first. Your Honor, we need to talk to you about... Not here. The judge glanced at the station keeper, who was watching them with undisguised curiosity. Is there somewhere private? The old man jerked his thumb toward a back room. Storage shed's empty, but the stage leaves in 10 minutes. Then we'd better talk fast. Judge Winters led them to the shed, shut the door behind them. In the dim light filtering through cracks in the walls, her expression turned serious. You're Caleb Rourke, the man accused of murdering the Whitmores. It wasn't a question. Yes, ma'am. And you, she looked at Alara, must be the woman who stopped his hanging, Alara Voss. How did you... I make it my business to know what's happening in the towns I'm assigned to. Cedar Hollow sent me a letter 3 weeks ago requesting I come for a murder trial. The letter described the accused and mentioned a woman who'd invoked marriage claim to halt the execution. She paused. What it didn't mention was why that woman would risk her life for a stranger, or why the accused looks like he's been running through the mountains for days. Because someone's trying to kill us before you get there, Alara said. Someone who doesn't want the truth coming out. And what truth is that? They told her everything. The fire, Emma's testimony, Hale's threats, the evidence they'd found at the Whitmore property. Caleb showed her the oil can with Hale's initials. Alara produced the water-damaged letter, handling it carefully because it was barely holding together. Judge Winters examined both items in silence. Her face gave nothing away. This is circumstantial at best, she said finally. A can that could have come from anywhere. A letter proving only that Hale wanted to buy property, which isn't a crime. And the testimony of an 8-year-old girl who was traumatized and might have confused what she saw in the dark. She's not confused, Alara said. I talked to her. She knows what she saw. I'm sure she believes she does. But belief and proof are different things. The judge set down the can. Here's what I see. A man accused of murder. Evidence that suggests he was at the scene. An entire town that believes he's guilty. And 2 people on the run making serious accusations against a prominent citizen without solid evidence to back them up. Caleb's shoulders slumped. So you won't help us? I didn't say that. Judge Winters crossed her arms. I said your evidence is weak. But weak evidence doesn't mean no case. It means we need more. And there's something about this situation that doesn't sit right with me. What? Alara asked. Darius Hale. I know of him. He's been on the territorial governor's watch list for years. Suspected of land fraud, witness intimidation, a dozen other things. But he's careful. Always stays just inside the law. If he's getting desperate enough to commit murder and frame an innocent man, that means something's changed. Something big enough to make him take risks. The mineral rights, Caleb said. There's copper in these mountains, maybe other minerals. Mining companies have been surveying for years. Whoever controls the land when they make their decision controls everything. The judge nodded slowly. That would do it. That kind of money makes people dangerous. She looked between them. Here's what we're going to do. I'm going to Cedar Hollow 3 days early. I'm going to announce that I'm conducting preliminary interviews and I want to hear from everyone involved. That includes you two, Emma Whitmore, Darius Hale, and anyone else who might have information. Hale won't let Emma testify, Elara said. He'll find a way to stop her. Then it's your job to make sure she gets there safely. Can you do that? How? We can't even get into town without being shot at. Judge Winters smiled grimly. You can if you're under my protection. As of this moment, you're both under territorial custody pending trial. That means anyone who harms you is interfering with the territorial justice system. Even Hale won't risk that. She paused. Probably. The word hung in the air between them. When do we leave? Caleb asked. Now. Stage will take us to Cedar Hollow by tomorrow afternoon. We'll arrive publicly, make it clear I'm there on official business. Hale will have to play by the rules, at least for a while. And if he doesn't, then we'll know exactly what kind of man he is, and so will everyone else. They boarded the stage with minutes to spare. The merchant who'd been waiting gave them suspicious looks but said nothing. Judge Winters sat across from them, already making notes in a small journal she'd pulled from her bag. As the stage rolled into motion, Elara felt something loosen in her chest. For the first time since this whole thing started, they weren't running, they weren't hiding, they were moving towards something instead of away from it. Caleb must have felt it too. He reached over and took her hand, squeezed it once. She squeezed back. They rode through the night, the stage swaying and jolting over rough roads. Elara dozed fitfully, waking every time they hit a particularly bad rut. Across from her, Judge Winters stayed awake, reading by lamplight from a stack of papers she'd produced from her traveling bag. What are you reading? Elara asked during one of her wakeful periods. Land records, mineral surveys, letters from the territorial governor about Cedar Hollow. She looked up. Something's been bothering me about Hale's timeline. If he wanted the Whitmore property badly enough to commit murder, why wait until now? Why not do it a year ago? 2 years ago? Maybe he only recently found out about the minerals? Possible, but the surveys have been public record for 18 months. He would have known. She tapped her papers thoughtfully. Unless something else changed. Something that made him need to move fast. Like what? I don't know yet, but I intend to find out. They reached Cedar Hollow just after noon the next day, coming down the valley road in full daylight. People stopped what they were doing to stare at the stage. Word spread fast. By the time they pulled up in front of the marshal's office, a crowd had gathered. Judge Winters stepped out first. I'm Territorial Judge Sarah Winters. I'm here to conduct preliminary hearings in the matter of the territory versus Caleb Rourke. Where's your marshal? Marshal Cole pushed through the crowd, looking flustered. Your Honor, we weren't expecting you until... Plans changed. I want to see your jail, your evidence, and a list of all witnesses, and I want it now. The marshal stammered something about needing to prepare, about not having things ready, but the judge cut him off with a look that could have frozen fire. Marshal, either you cooperate with this investigation, or I'll report to the territorial governor that Cedar Hollow is obstructing justice. Which would you prefer? Yes, ma'am. Of course, ma'am. Caleb and Elara climbed out of the stage last. The crowd's murmur turned ugly when they appeared. Someone shouted, "Murderer!" Another voice called for hanging him right there. Judge Winters turned to face the crowd. The accused are under my protection and territorial custody. Anyone who interferes with them answers to me and the full weight of territorial law. Is that clear? The crowd didn't disperse, but they backed off. Elara could see faces she recognized from the almost hanging, the same anger, the same certainty, but now tempered with uncertainty about this judge who'd arrived like a storm. In the marshal's office, Judge Winters commandeered the main desk and started working. She sent the marshal scrambling to gather documents and witnesses. She sent a runner to fetch Darius Hale, and she assigned a deputy, not Riley, she was careful about that, to guard Caleb and Elara. You'll stay at the boarding house, she told them. Margaret Hayes runs a respectable establishment, and I trust her to keep you safe. Don't leave without my permission. Don't talk to anyone about the case. Understood? They understood. Margaret nearly fainted when they walked through her door. "What are you doing here? How did you—" "Long story," Ilara said. "We need rooms. Judge's orders." "The judge is here?" Margaret looked between them and the deputy standing guard outside. "What's happening?" "Justice," Ilara said. "I hope." They spent the afternoon in a small room on the second floor waiting. Through the window, Ilara could see activity in the street, people gathering in small groups, talking, arguments breaking out. The whole town was buzzing like a disturbed beehive. Just before sunset, there was a knock. Margaret entered with food and news. "Hale's furious," she said quietly. "He tried to send the judge away, said she had no authority to come early. She told him she had every authority, and if he didn't cooperate, she'd have him arrested for obstruction." "How did he take that?" Caleb asked. "About as well as you'd expect. He's gathering his own witnesses, building his case. He's not going down without a fight." "What about Emma?" Margaret's expression shifted to worry. "That's the problem. I went to see Helen, Emma's grandmother. The house was locked up tight, curtains drawn. When I knocked, Helen answered but wouldn't let me in. Said Emma was sick, couldn't have visitors." Ilara felt ice in her stomach. "She's not sick. No, she's being kept quiet. I could see it in Helen's face. She was scared." "Hale got to her," Caleb said. "Threatened her somehow. Made her keep Emma locked up so she can't testify." "What do we do?" Ilara asked. "I don't know. If we try to force our way in, it'll look like we're the ones intimidating witnesses. But without Emma's testimony, we have other evidence," Ilara said, though she didn't sound convinced. "The can, the letter." "Circumstantial, remember? Judge said so herself." Margaret sat down heavily. "I've been in this town 20 years, never seen Hale this rattled. He's making mistakes, acting out of fear instead of calculation. But that makes him more dangerous, not less." They ate dinner in tense silence. Outside, the sun set and the town settled into an uneasy night. Somewhere out there, Emma was locked in her grandmother's house, unable to speak the truth she knew. Somewhere out there, Hale was planning his next move. And here, in this small room, 3 people tried to figure out how to win a fight that seemed designed for them to lose. The preliminary hearing was set for the next morning in the town hall. Judge Winters had made it clear she expected full attendance. Witnesses, townspeople, everyone involved. Ilara barely slept. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw that moment at the gallows, saw the rope, saw the mob, saw the fear in Caleb's eyes that he'd tried so hard to hide. When morning came, she dressed in the cleanest clothes Margaret could provide. Caleb did the same. They looked almost respectable, almost like people who deserved to be heard. The town hall was packed, every seat filled, people standing along the walls. The air was thick with tension and body heat. Ilara and Caleb sat at a table in front with the deputy guard standing behind them. Across the aisle, Darius Hale sat with his own table, his lawyer beside him. Riley and 3 other men, the ones who'd supposedly witnessed the attack at the Whitmore property, sat behind Hale. Judge Winters entered through a side door and the room went silent. She took her seat at the front, arranged her papers, and looked out over the crowd. "This is a preliminary hearing," she began, "not a trial. My job is to determine if there's enough evidence to proceed with formal charges. I'll hear testimony from both sides. I'll examine evidence, and I'll make my determination based on facts, not feelings. Is that clear?" Murmurs of agreement. "Good. The territory calls its first witness. Caleb Rourke, please stand." Caleb stood, looking every person in that room in the eye. Ilara could feel the weight of their judgment pressing down like a physical thing. Judge Winters asked him to recount the night of the fire, every detail. Caleb spoke quietly but clearly, describing the smoke, the flames, his failed attempts to save Henry and Martha. When he got to the part about pulling the bodies from the ruins, his voice cracked, but he kept going. When he finished, Hale's lawyer stood. "Mr. Rourke, you claim you were trying to save the Whitmores, yet multiple witnesses saw you standing over their bodies, covered in ash, holding a dead man. How do you explain that?" "I was trying to save them." "Or you were admiring your work." "Objection," Judge Winters said sharply. "This isn't a cross-examination. Save the theatrics for trial." The lawyer sat down, smiling like he'd made his point anyway. Judge Winters called the marshal next. He testified about finding Caleb at the scene, about the lamp oil discovered around the foundation, about Caleb's arrest and detention. It was all factual, all damning. Then she called Marcus Rourke. Caleb's brother walked to the front slowly, not looking at anyone. He was younger than Caleb, but he looked older somehow, worn down by something. Mr. Rourke, you testified previously that you saw your brother at the Whitmore property the night of the fire. Is that correct? Yes, ma'am. Describe what you saw. Marcus swallowed hard. I was riding home late, maybe midnight. I saw smoke and rode over to see what was happening. When I got there, the cabin was burning hard, and I saw Caleb standing there with Henry's body, just standing there, not moving. Did you see him start the fire? No, but he was there, and the fire was going. Did you see anyone else? No. Judge Winters made a note. Thank you. You may sit. As Marcus walked back to his seat, he finally looked at Caleb. The expression on his face was complicated. Guilt, anger, pain, all mixed together. Caleb looked back steadily, giving nothing away. The morning wore on. Witness after witness, each adding another layer to the case against Caleb. By noon, Alara felt like she was drowning in it. Every piece of evidence, every testimony, all pointing the same direction. Then Judge Winters called a recess for lunch. Outside, people clustered in groups, talking. Alara and Caleb stayed inside with their guard, eating food Margaret had brought. The judge was in a back room, reviewing her notes. It's not going well, Caleb said quietly. It's not over yet. Alara, you heard them. They've got everything lined up perfect. I don't have an alibi. I was there at the scene. The evidence all points to me. We have the oil can. We have the letter. Circumstantial, remember? Before Alara could respond, there was a commotion outside. Raised voices. The sound of someone pushing through the crowd. Margaret burst through the door, breathing hard. Emma's here. What? Emma Whitmore. She's outside. She wants to testify. They rushed to the door. There, standing in the middle of the crowd with her grandmother beside her, was Emma. The little girl looked terrified but determined, her small hand gripping a piece of paper. Hale saw her at the same time. His face went pale, then red. Helen, what are you doing? I told you to keep her home. Helen Whitmore stood up straighter than Alara had seen her stand since this whole thing began. You told me to lie. Told me to keep my granddaughter quiet. Threatened to take my house if I didn't cooperate. Her voice shook but held firm. I went along because I was scared. But I'm done being scared. My granddaughter has something to say, and by heaven, she's going to say it. Judge Winters appeared in the doorway. Mrs. Whitmore, I'm going to ask you to repeat that inside, under oath. The afternoon session began with Helen's testimony. She told the court everything, how Hale had come to her house the night after the judge's arrival, how he'd threatened her loan, how he'd made it clear Emma's testimony would be a problem for everyone involved. Hale's lawyer objected repeatedly, calling it hearsay and speculation. But Judge Winters let Helen speak, and the whole town heard. Then it was Emma's turn. The little girl walked to the front, so small she could barely see over the witness table. Judge Winters had her sit in a chair so people could see her face. Emma, the judge said gently, I know this is scary, but I need you to tell me the truth about what you saw the night your parents died. Can you do that? Emma nodded. Tell me in your own words. Take your time. And Emma did. She told them about sneaking out to get her doll, about seeing a man by her house, about watching him pour something on the ground and light it, about hiding behind the woodpile, too scared to scream. Was this man Mr. Rourke? Judge Winters asked. No, Mr. Rourke came after. He tried to get inside, but the fire was too big. I saw him try 3 times. He was crying. The room was absolutely silent. How do you know it wasn't Mr. Rourke you saw first? Because Mr. Rourke wears a wool cap. The man I saw wore a fancy hat with a wide brim, like the ones rich people wear. Hale stood up. This is absurd. The girl is confused. She's traumatized. She doesn't know what she's saying. Sit down, Mr. Hale, Judge Winters said. She's making this up. Someone told her what to say. I said sit down. Hale sat, but he looked like a trapped animal now, desperate and cornered. Emma pulled out the paper she'd been holding. I drew what I saw. The hat. The way the man stood. Everything. She handed it to the judge. Judge Winters studied the drawing. Then she held it up for the court to see. Let the record show the witness has provided a detailed drawing of the hat in question. Alara couldn't see the drawing clearly from where she sat, but she saw Hale's face go white. The judge called a brief recess to examine the physical evidence. She sent for the oil can and the letter Caleb and Alara had found, laid them out on her table along with Emma's drawing. When the hearing resumed, she addressed the full court. I've reviewed all testimony and evidence. What I see is this: a man accused of murder based largely on circumstantial evidence, a powerful citizen who had motive and opportunity to commit the crime, a child witness whose testimony has been suppressed through intimidation, and physical evidence that suggests arson committed by someone other than the accused. She paused, letting that sink in. Mr. Hale, please stand. Hale stood slowly. For the first time since Alara had met him, he looked uncertain. Did you visit Helen Whitmore's residence and threaten her to keep her granddaughter from testifying? I did no such thing. I merely advised her. Answer the question. Did you threaten her? Hale's jaw worked. I expressed concern about traumatizing the child further with unnecessary testimony. That's not what Mrs. Whitmore testified. She said you threatened to call in her loan if Emma spoke to me. Is that true? I may have mentioned the loan was coming due. Yes or no, Mr. Hale? The whole room waited. I was protecting her, Hale said finally. The girl doesn't know what she saw. I was trying to prevent false testimony from contradicting your version of events. Judge Winters' voice was steel. Mr. Hale, based on testimony I've heard today, I'm issuing a warrant for your arrest on charges of witness intimidation. Marshal Cole, please take Mr. Hale into custody. The room erupted, people shouting, some in agreement, some in outrage. Hale's face went from white to purple. You can't do this. I'm a respected citizen of this town. You're a suspect in a murder investigation. Marshal, now. Marshal Cole looked like he wanted to be anywhere else, but he moved forward. Riley started to intervene, but the judge fixed him with a look that stopped him cold. As the marshal led Hale toward the door, Hale turned to look at Caleb. The hatred in his eyes was so pure it was almost physical. This isn't over, he said. You think you've won? You've won nothing. Nothing. They took him out still shouting. Judge Winters waited for the room to quiet. This hearing is adjourned. I'm ordering a full investigation into the Whitmore murders to be conducted by territorial authorities, not local law enforcement. Mr. Rourke, you're released from custody pending the outcome of that investigation. However, you're not to leave the area. Understood? Caleb nodded, looking dazed. This court is dismissed. People filed out slowly, talking in shocked whispers. Alara sat frozen, trying to process what had just happened. They'd won, or at least survived. Caleb was free. Hale was arrested. But something felt wrong. Margaret appeared at her elbow. You need to leave. Now. What? Hale's men. They're gathering outside. They're angry. Judge might have authority here, but she's one woman and there's dozens of them. They're talking about taking matters into their own hands. Alara looked at Caleb. We need to go. They left through a back door, Margaret leading them through alleys toward the boarding house. But they could hear shouting from the main street, a crowd forming. My house won't be safe, Margaret said. They know you're staying there. Then where? Alara asked. Caleb was looking toward the mountains. We go back. Back up to the cabin. It's defensible, and they'd have to come at us uphill. We can hold out there until the territorial investigators arrive. How long will that take? Days? Maybe a week. We might not have a week. A crash behind them, the sound of breaking glass. The mob was getting violent, searching for them. They ran, through town, avoiding the main streets, keeping to shadows. A few people saw them, but most were gathered at the town hall, listening to angry speeches about outside judges and territorial interference. They made it to the edge of town and started up the mountain path. Behind them, Cedar Hollow was a mess of shouting and torchlight. Alara could see smoke rising. Someone had started a fire. They're burning something, she said. Probably Margaret's place, Caleb said grimly. Hale's men getting revenge. They climbed faster. Halfway up, Alara heard hoofbeats. She looked back and saw riders leaving town, heading up the mountain. At least 6 of them, maybe more. They're coming, she said. Caleb grabbed her hand and pulled her off the main path, into the rough country where horses couldn't follow. They scrambled over rocks, through underbrush, climbing higher and higher. The sun was setting, painting everything in shades of red and gold. Beautiful and terrible at the same time. They made it to the cabin just as full dark fell. Caleb barricaded the door while Ilara lit a candle. Outside, they could hear the riders arriving, spreading out, surrounding the property. "Rourke!" a voice called. Riley. "Come out! You and that woman! Come out or we're coming in!" Caleb checked the pistol. 6 bullets, 6 riders at least. The math didn't work. "There's another way out," he whispered to Ilara. "Through the back. A gap in the wall I used to use when I was younger. Leads to a trail that goes higher into the mountains. You take it, you run. You don't stop until you're clear. What about you?" "I'll hold them here. Buy you time." "Absolutely not. We're not doing this. We're not splitting up." "Ilara." "No." She grabbed the pistol from him. "We go together or not at all." Before he could argue, something hit the cabin wall. A torch. Then another. They were setting the cabin on fire. Smoke started seeping in through the cracks. The choice was made for them. "The back way," Caleb said. "Now." They pried loose the boards Caleb had described and squeezed through into the night. Behind them, the cabin was starting to burn in earnest. They could hear Riley and his men shouting, moving around to cut off escape. But Caleb knew this mountain, knew every trail and hiding spot. He led Ilara higher, into country so rough even desperate men would think twice about following in the dark. They climbed until they couldn't hear pursuit anymore. Climbed until Ilara's lungs burned and her legs wouldn't work right. Climbed until they reached a high ridge where they could see the whole valley spread below. Cedar Hollow glowed with scattered fires. Ilara could see flames where Margaret's boarding house had been. Could see the orange glow of Caleb's cabin burning. "We've lost everything," she said. Caleb put his arm around her, but not everything. We're alive. We've got the truth on our side, and we've got each other. That might not be enough. Then we'll make it enough. They stood on that ridge as night deepened, watching the valley burn, and somewhere in that moment Ilara realized something. She'd come to Cedar Hollow running from her past. Had stopped Caleb's hanging on impulse, had married a stranger to save his life, but somewhere along the way, it had stopped being impulse, stopped being about running. She'd found something worth fighting for, someone worth standing beside. "We need to move," Caleb said. "Get farther up before they organize a real search." "Where are we going?" "Higher. There's old mining country up there. Abandoned camps. We can hide, wait for the territorial investigators to arrive and calm things down." "And if they don't come?" "They'll come. Judge Winters will make sure of it." They started climbing again, into the high country where the air was thin and the stars looked close enough to touch. Behind them, Cedar Hollow continued its chaos. Ahead, the mountains waited with their ancient patience. And between those 2 points, 2 people climbed through the dark, refusing to quit, refusing to break, carrying their small flame of truth against the wind. They spent the night in a cave so high up the mountain that clouds drifted past the entrance like ghosts. Ilara couldn't sleep. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Margaret's boarding house burning, saw the mob's torches, saw Riley's face twisted with rage. Caleb sat near the cave mouth, watching the valley below. In the pre-dawn darkness, Cedar Hollow's scattered fires had mostly burned out, leaving just a few orange embers glowing against the black. "We can't stay up here forever," Ilara said quietly. "I know. They'll search. Eventually they'll find us." "Maybe. Or maybe they'll give up. Riley and his men aren't mountain people. This terrain will break them after a few days." "And what about us? We don't have food. We don't have supplies. How long can we last?" Caleb didn't answer. They both knew the truth. A few days, maybe a week, if they were careful and lucky. After that, they'd be too weak to run, too weak to fight. They'd either have to surrender or die up here in the thin air and cold. "There has to be another way," Ilara said. "I'm open to suggestions." She thought about it, turning the problem over in her mind like a puzzle with pieces that wouldn't fit. They couldn't go back to town, couldn't wait for the territorial investigators because they might not survive long enough to see them arrive. Couldn't run because there was nowhere left to run to. "The fire," she said suddenly. "What about it?" "The valley. It's dry right now. All that brush and dead grass. If a fire started down there, it would spread fast. muzzle. Caleb turned to look at her. You want to burn the valley? I want to create a crisis big enough that everyone stops thinking about us and starts thinking about survival. Hale's ranch is down there, most of the town's grazing land. If a wildfire tears through, they'll have to fight it or lose everything. That's insane. You have a better idea? He was quiet for a long moment. Even if we started a fire, what good does that do us? We'd still be hunted, still be blamed for everything. Not if we're the ones fighting the fire. Not if we're the ones trying to save them. Alara stood, warming to the idea now that she'd said it out loud. Think about it. A fire starts. We show up to help fight it. We risk our lives alongside the same people who want us dead. How does that look? Like murderers? Or like people trying to save their community? It looks like desperation. It is desperation, but it's also the truth. We're not the bad guys here. We never were. And if we can make them see that, make them question what Hale's been telling them. Caleb ran a hand through his hair. This is the craziest thing I've ever heard. Crazier than marrying a stranger to avoid hanging? Despite everything, he almost smiled. Point taken. So we do it? I don't know. Let me think. He moved to the cave mouth, looking out at the valley as dawn started to break. The sky was turning from black to deep blue, stars fading one by one. Alara joined him. Together, they watched the sun rise over the mountains, painting everything in shades of gold and pink. It was beautiful. It was also the last sunrise before everything would change, one way or another. All right, Caleb said finally. We do it, but we do it smart. We start the fire upwind of the town, let it burn toward Hale's ranch. That gives people time to see it coming, time to evacuate livestock and get ready. We're not trying to kill anyone. Just trying to save everyone. Yeah, and probably die in the process. They spent the morning preparing. Caleb knew the valley's wind patterns, knew where to start a fire that would burn hot and fast, but predictable. They'd need to set it in the dry canyon west of Hale's property, where the brush was thickest and the wind would push flames directly toward his grazing land. By noon, they were ready. Or as ready as two desperate people with no supplies and no backup could be. They made their way down the mountain carefully, avoiding the main trails where Riley's men might still be searching. It took hours. By the time they reached the western canyon, the sun was starting its afternoon descent. The canyon was perfect for what they needed. Dry grass, dead brush, and a narrow funnel that would channel the fire toward the valley. Caleb found a spot where the wind was right, where the flames would catch and spread fast. Last chance to change your mind, he said. Alara looked at the canyon, then at the valley beyond. She could see Hale's ranch from here, sprawling and prosperous. Could see the grazing land that he'd killed for, lied for, destroyed lives for. Light it, she said. Caleb used the flint from his pocket, striking it against steel until sparks caught in the dry grass. For a moment, nothing happened. Then a small flame flickered to life. Then another. The wind caught them, fed them, and suddenly the fire was alive and growing. They backed away as it spread, faster than Alara had expected. Within minutes, the whole canyon was burning, flames leaping from bush to bush, sending up columns of black smoke that rose like pillars into the clear sky. That'll get their attention, Caleb said. They ran toward the valley, angling to intercept the fire's path. Already they could hear shouts from the direction of Hale's ranch. People seeing the smoke, raising the alarm. By the time they reached the ranch's outer fence line, the fire was a roaring wall of flame behind them, eating through the canyon and spilling into the valley. The heat was incredible, the smoke choking. And there, ahead of them, were people. Ranch hands scrambling to move cattle, women carrying water buckets, a few men with shovels trying to dig fire breaks. Someone saw Caleb and Alara approaching and shouted, "It's Rourke! He started the fire!" Caleb ignored them, ran straight to where the fire was closest to the ranch buildings, and started digging, throwing dirt on flames, clearing brush. Alara did the same, grabbing a bucket someone had dropped and hauling water from the ranch well. The heat was overwhelming. Her eyes streamed from smoke. Her hands blistered on the shovel handle, but she kept working. More people arrived. Some to fight the fire, some to fight Caleb and Alara. One of the ranch hands grabbed Caleb by the shoulder, spun him around. "You son of a... I'm trying to save your ranch," Caleb shouted. "Help or get out of the way." The hand hesitated, looking at the flames, looking at Caleb covered in soot and ash, working like a man possessed. Finally, he grabbed a shovel and started digging beside him. The fire was spreading faster than they could contain it. Flames jumped the first firebreak they dug, caught on the roof of a storage building. Someone screamed. People ran with buckets, but it wasn't enough. "We need to backburn," Caleb shouted over the roar. "Start a controlled burn between the fire and the main buildings. Give it nothing to feed on." "Are you crazy?" someone yelled back. "It's the only way. Trust me." He didn't wait for permission. Started setting small fires in the grass between the wildfire and the ranch house, creating a burned barrier that would rob the main fire of fuel. It was risky. If the wind shifted, they'd lose everything. But Caleb's hands were steady, his judgment sure. Alara worked alongside him, helping control the backburn, stamping out flames that went too far. Other people joined them, following Caleb's lead despite their suspicion and fear. The wildfire hit the burned section and stalled, flames dying for lack of fuel. For a moment, it looked like they might actually hold it. Then the wind shifted. The fire turned, spreading east now instead of north, racing toward a section of the ranch they hadn't protected yet. Toward the main house where Hale's family lived. "Everyone move," Caleb shouted. "Get to the house! Defend the house!" They ran. Alara's legs were shaking, her lungs raw from smoke, but she ran anyway. They reached the house just ahead of the flames. "Wet everything!" someone shouted. "The roof! The walls! Everything!" They formed a bucket line from the well to the house, passing water hand to hand, drenching the building. Alara was in the middle of the line, between a ranch hand she didn't know and a woman who might have been at the hanging, might have been one of the voices calling for Caleb's death. None of that mattered now. They worked together, moving water faster than seemed possible, soaking the house until it dripped. The fire reached them like a living thing, roaring and hungry. It climbed the fence, caught on the barn, sent embers spiraling into the sky. The heat was so intense Alara thought her skin might blister just from proximity. But the house held. The wet walls refused to catch. The fire moved around them, searching for easier fuel, leaving the main building standing. They'd saved it. Alara collapsed against the well, coughing so hard she thought she might break something. Around her, people were doing the same, dropping where they stood, exhausted beyond measure. The fire was still burning, but moving away now, heading for empty grazing land where it could burn itself out without destroying anything vital. They'd won. Barely, but they'd won. Someone handed Alara water. She drank without looking at who offered it, too tired to care. When she finally looked up, she saw it was Riley. The deputy was covered in soot and ash, his face streaked with sweat and grime. He looked different somehow. Smaller. Less certain. "You saved us," he said quietly. "Why?" "Because it was the right thing to do," Alara said. "After everything we did to you, after we tried to—" He couldn't finish. "Yeah, after all of that." Riley looked away. "My uncle's inside in the house. He was there when the fire started. Refused to leave." "Is he hurt?" "No, but I don't know, different. The fire broke something in him." Before Alara could respond, the front door of the house opened. Darius Hale stepped out, moving like a man in a daze. He looked at the burned land, the smoking ruins of his barn, the people collapsed in his yard. Then he looked at Caleb and Alara. For a long moment, no one spoke. The only sound was the distant crackling of flames and the ragged breathing of exhausted people. "You saved my home," Hale said. His voice was flat, empty of the authority and command it usually carried. "We tried to save the valley," Caleb said. "Your home was part of that. Even after everything I did to you." "Yeah, even after." Hale's face worked, emotions crossing it too fast to track. Finally, he sank down onto his porch steps like his legs wouldn't hold him anymore. "I killed them," he said. The words fell into the silence like stones into deep water. "Henry and Martha Whitmore. I killed them, set the fire, watched it burn, let you take the blame." He looked at his hands like they belonged to someone else. "I told myself it was necessary. Told myself the land was worth it, the mineral rights, the money, that 2 lives didn't matter against all that potential." Alara felt the world tilt. After everything, after all the running and hiding and fighting, here was the confession. Simple and stark and terrible. "Why are you telling us this?" Caleb asked. "Because I just watched you risk your lives to save mine. Because I realized Hale's voice cracked. I realized I'm looking at better people than I'll ever be, and I can't carry this anymore. Can't keep pretending. Can't keep destroying people for money I don't even need. People were gathering now, drawn by the confession. Ranch hands, townspeople who'd come to fight the fire. Riley standing frozen with shock on his face. Marshal Cole pushed through the crowd, looking harried and confused. Mr. Hale, you're not in your right mind. The smoke, the stress. I'm perfectly clear, Marshal. Clearer than I've been in months. Hale stood, straightened his shoulders. I'm confessing to the murder of Henry and Martha Whitmore. I set the fire. I framed Caleb Rourke. I intimidated witnesses and obstructed justice. And I'm done running from it. The marshal looked like he wanted to argue, but the crowd was watching. Too many witnesses. Too many people hearing the truth. I'll need you to come with me, the marshal said finally. I know. Hale looked at Caleb one more time. I'm sorry. It doesn't fix anything. It doesn't bring them back. But I'm sorry. Caleb didn't respond, just watched as the marshal led Hale away through the crowd. People parted to let them pass, murmuring, trying to process what they'd just heard. Riley was still standing there, looking lost. He really did it. All this time I thought, I was so sure you were guilty. Yeah, you were, Caleb said. There was no anger in his voice, just exhaustion. We all believe what's easiest to believe, what fits the story we want to tell. I don't know what to say. Then don't say anything. Just help us get back to town. We need to find Judge Winters. Need to make sure this confession is official. The walk back to Cedar Hollow took hours. Alara moved in a daze, her body on autopilot, while her mind tried to catch up with everything that had happened. Around her, people who'd wanted her dead that morning were now offering her water, helping her over rough ground, treating her like she mattered. It was disorienting, more disorienting than the danger had been. They found Judge Winters at what remained of the marshal's office. She'd been coordinating the fire response from there, sending runners and organizing bucket brigades. When she saw Caleb and Alara, her expression shifted from professional concern to something that might have been relief. You're alive, she said. Barely, Alara managed. I heard about the fire, heard you started it. We did, and we fought it, and in the process, Hale confessed to the murders. The judge's eyebrows rose. He what? They told her everything, the confession, the witnesses, all of it. By the time they finished, the judge was already writing, documenting everything in her precise legal hand. This changes everything, she said. With Hale's confession, the case against you is over, Mr. Rourke. You're completely exonerated. The words should have meant more, should have felt like victory, but Caleb just nodded, too tired to feel much of anything. What happens now? Alara asked. Now? Hale stands trial for murder. The territorial governor will send investigators to determine the full extent of his crimes. The town will have to reckon with what they almost did to an innocent man. She looked at them both. And you two get to decide what comes next, where you go from here, where they went from here. Alara hadn't thought that far ahead, had been so focused on surviving each day that she'd stopped imagining any kind of future. I don't know, she said honestly. Well, you've got time to figure it out. Judge Winters stood. In the meantime, I'm ordering you both to rest. You look like you're about to fall over. Margaret appeared from somewhere, soot-covered and determined. They can stay with me. Well, what's left of my place? The fire didn't take everything. Your boarding house, Alara started, got damaged, but it's still standing. More than I can say for a lot of things today. Margaret's smile was tired but genuine. Come on, let's get you cleaned up and fed. Everything else can wait. They followed her through streets that looked different in the fading light, less hostile, less certain of their righteousness. People nodded as they passed. A few even spoke words of thanks. It was strange, unnerving. Alara had gotten used to being the enemy, didn't know how to be anything else. Margaret's boarding house was damaged but livable. The fire had taken part of the back wall and most of the second floor was smoke damaged, but the main floor was intact. She set them up in a ground floor room, brought them water and food and clean clothes. Sleep, she ordered. Both of you, you've earned it. Alara wanted to argue that there was too much to do, too much to process, but her body made the decision for her. She fell into bed and was unconscious within seconds. She dreamed of fire, of smoke and running and hands reaching out of darkness. But this time, when she woke, it was to sunlight streaming through a window and the smell of coffee. Caleb was already up, sitting by the window with a cup. He looked more rested than she'd seen him since this whole thing started. The haunted look in his eyes had faded, replaced by something that might have been peace. "Morning," he said. "How long did I sleep?" 14 hours. It's almost noon. Ilara sat up, wincing at muscles that had stiffened overnight. "What did I miss?" The territorial investigators arrived this morning. They're interviewing everyone, documenting Hale's confession. Emma gave her statement again. Helen backed her up. Marcus, my brother, came forward and admitted he'd been pressured by Hale to testify against me. Caleb took a sip of coffee. It's all coming apart. Everything Hale built, all his lies and manipulations, people are starting to see how deep it goes. How do you feel about that? I don't know. Vindicated, I guess, but also angry. All those months in jail. All that time people treated me like I was already dead. Anna's death broke me, but what came after nearly destroyed what was left. But you're still here. Yeah, I'm still here. He looked at her. Because of you. You know that, right? If you hadn't stepped in that day, I'd be dead. Everything that's happened since, we wouldn't have found the truth. Hale would still be free. The Whitmores would still be just another tragedy people talked about and forgot. Ilara didn't know what to say to that. She'd acted on impulse that day at the gallows. Hadn't thought through the consequences, but looking at Caleb now, seeing him free and clear, and maybe, just maybe, starting to heal, she thought maybe some impulses were worth following. "What do we do now?" she asked. "The cabin's gone. Your property's probably forfeit to pay for damages." "Actually, no." Caleb set down his coffee. "Judge Winters told me this morning that the territorial government is seizing Hale's assets. His ranch, his land, everything. As restitution, they're offering me the Whitmore property, the 20 acres that started all of this. Will you take it? I don't know. Being there, on the land where Henry and Martha died, I'm not sure I can do that." He was quiet for a moment. "But then I think about Emma, about Helen trying to raise a little girl on her own, about how that property could be something good instead of something poisoned by what happened there. You want to give it to them? Maybe. Or maybe we rebuild there. Make it into something new, a place that remembers Henry and Martha, but isn't defined by how they died." The way he said "we" made Ilara's heart skip. "We?" Caleb looked almost embarrassed. "If you want. I know this whole marriage thing started as legal maneuvering. You don't owe me anything. You're free to go wherever you want. Start fresh somewhere that doesn't know about any of this. Is that what you want, for me to leave?" "No, but I won't trap you here out of obligation." Ilara thought about it. Thought about the life she'd left behind, the running and hiding and constant looking over her shoulder. Thought about the moment she'd stepped forward at the gallows. Thought about the last few weeks, the fear and exhaustion and those small moments in the cabin when it had been just the two of them against the world. "I'm not staying out of obligation," she said. "I'm staying because I want to. Because somehow, accidentally, I found something here worth building toward. Found someone worth standing beside." Caleb's expression shifted, hope and disbelief mixing together. "You mean that? I married you, didn't I? Might as well make it real." He laughed, sudden and genuine, the sound filling the small room. Then he crossed to where she sat and took her hands, careful of her blistered palms. "Then we do this together. We rebuild. We make something good out of all this mess. And we do it our way, not anyone else's." "Together," Ilara agreed. Over the next few days, Cedar Hollow slowly found its balance again. The territorial investigators documented everything, building a case against Hale that would see him in prison for the rest of his life. Riley resigned as deputy, unable to reconcile what he'd done with who he thought he was. The marshal, complicit in too many of Hale's schemes, was removed from office. Judge Winters stayed through it all, making sure justice was actually served this time. She interviewed dozens of people, uncovered more of Hale's crimes, brought sunlight to things that had festered in shadow for years. Emma and Helen were moved into a small house in town, provided for by the territorial government as victims of Hale's schemes. Emma started drawing again, but this time the pictures were of flowers and horses instead of fire. Marcus came to see Caleb 3 days after the confession. The brothers stood facing each other in Margaret's boarding house parlor, neither quite sure what to say. "I'm sorry," Marcus said finally. "I should have believed you, should have known you couldn't have done it. You believed what you saw. I believed what I wanted to see, what was easier to see." Marcus's hands clenched and unclenched at his sides. "I was angry at you for leaving after Anna died, for abandoning the family, the town, everything. When the fire happened and you were there, it felt like proof that you'd gone bad, that I'd been right to be angry, so I let myself believe it. I did leave," Caleb said quietly. "I did abandon things. But I was drowning, Marcus. Grief was pulling me under, and I couldn't breathe down in that town. Coming up here was survival. I know, I should have seen that, should have helped, instead of judged." They stood in silence for a moment, then Caleb held out his hand. "Fresh start?" Marcus took it, gripped tight. Fresh start. It wasn't complete forgiveness, wasn't instant repair of 3 years of fracture. But it was a beginning, which was all any of them could ask for. 2 weeks after the fire, Alara and Caleb rode out to the Whitmore property. They'd been putting it off, neither quite ready to face what remained. The burned cabin had been cleared away by volunteers from town, the charred timbers hauled off, the foundation left bare. But the land around it was already starting to recover. Green shoots pushing up through the ash, wildflowers blooming in the disturbed soil. "We could build here," Caleb said, standing where the cabin's front door used to be. "Make it bigger. Room for a family someday, maybe. Or we could build somewhere else on the property. Leave this spot as a memorial. Plant trees, make it a place to remember them by." "That's better. That's good." They walked the property together, planning without quite realizing they were planning. A house there, on the rise with a view of the valley. A garden where the soil was good. A barn near the creek where water ran year-round. It would take time, take work and money and more patience than either of them probably had. But standing there in the afternoon sun, Alara could see it, could imagine a life built from these ashes. "We should ask Emma and Helen what they want," she said. "This was their family's land. They should have a say. We could offer them a partnership. They keep part of the property, we develop the rest. Make sure Emma always has a place to come back to." "You've gotten soft, Caleb Rourke." "Maybe. Or maybe I'm just tired of people losing things because of other people's greed." They returned to town as the sun was setting, riding side by side through country that looked different now. Less threatening, less hostile. Just land, waiting to be worked and lived on and loved. The trial of Darius Hale began 3 weeks after his confession. It was short, almost anticlimactic. With his own words condemning him, with physical evidence and multiple witnesses, there was no defense to mount. The jury deliberated for less than an hour. Guilty on all counts. Judge Winters sentenced him to life in territorial prison. As the marshal led him away, Hale looked at Caleb one last time. "I hope you build something good there," he said. "I hope you make it mean something." Then he was gone, and the courtroom slowly emptied, people returning to their lives with a strange mixture of relief and shame. Alara found herself standing outside with Margaret and Emma, watching the sun set over the valley. "What will you do now?" Emma asked. The little girl had grown in the last few weeks, seemed older than her 8 years. Trauma did that sometimes. "We're going to rebuild on your family's land," Alara said. "But part of it will always be yours. Your grandmother, too. We wanted to make sure you knew that." Emma was quiet for a moment. Then she reached into her pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. "I drew this. For you and Mr. Rourke." Alara unfolded it carefully. The drawing showed a house on a hill, flowers in the yard, 2 figures standing in the doorway. The sun was shining. There was no fire anywhere. "It's beautiful," Alara said, her throat tight. "That's what I want it to look like. When you build it, happy." "We'll do our best." They started building in early autumn, when the heat had broken and the days were clear and cool. Caleb did most of the construction with help from a few townspeople who wanted to make amends. Marcus came out most days, working alongside his brother with the quiet determination of someone trying to earn back trust. Alara handled everything else: supplies, food, planning. She also started sewing again, making clothes and selling them to neighboring towns. The money wasn't much, but it was steady. It was honest. The house went up slowly, one log at a time. It wasn't fancy, just solid and square, with good bones and a porch that faced the mountains. But it was theirs, built with their own hands, and that made it more valuable than any mansion. Winter came early that year. By the time they got the roof on and the windows sealed, the first snow was already falling. They moved in with half the interior unfinished, sleeping in one room while the rest waited for spring. It should have been miserable, cold and uncomfortable and cramped, but Alara found she didn't mind. Found something comforting in the simplicity of it. 2 people, 1 room, a stove, and the quiet. "This is nothing like what I imagined my life would be," she said one night, watching snow fall past the window. "Better or worse?" Caleb asked. "Different, but good different. The kind you don't plan for but can't imagine living without once you have it." He pulled her closer. They'd fallen into a real marriage somewhere along the way, though Alara couldn't pinpoint exactly when. Maybe it was during the long nights in the mountain cave. Maybe it was fighting the fire together. Maybe it was just the accumulation of small moments when they chose each other over everything else. "I love you," Caleb said quietly, "in case I haven't said that enough." "You haven't said it at all." "Then I'm saying it now. I love you. You saved my life, and then you made it worth living. I don't know how I got that lucky." Alara turned to look at him. In the lamplight, his face was softer than she'd ever seen it. The walls he'd built around himself after Anna's death had finally come down. "I love you too," she said. "Even though you're stubborn, and you brood too much, and you still won't talk about your feelings unless I force you. I'm working on that. I know. That's why I'm staying." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the snow accumulate outside. Tomorrow they'd have to dig out the door, check on the animals, start the endless work of surviving a mountain winter. But tonight, they could just be. Just exist in this moment they'd built together from nothing. Spring came eventually, the way it always did. The snow melted, revealing the land beneath. Alara planted a garden in the spot they'd cleared, putting in seeds Margaret had saved from the previous year. Caleb finished the interior of the house, adding rooms and details that made it feel like a home instead of just a shelter. Emma and Helen visited regularly, bringing food and news from town. Emma loved the house, loved running through the rooms and declaring which one would be hers when she visited. Helen was quieter, but Alara could see the weight lifting from her shoulders as time passed and healing began. One afternoon in late spring, they planted trees on the spot where the Whitmore cabin had burned. Apple trees, 4 of them, one for each member of the family that had been lost. Henry, Martha, and in a way, Emma and Helen's old life. "They would have liked this," Helen said, touching the small sapling that would someday grow tall and bear fruit. "Henry always wanted an orchard." "Then he'll have one," Caleb said. They stood together in the sunshine, 4 people bound by tragedy, but choosing to build something better. It wasn't redemption exactly. The dead were still dead. The past couldn't be changed. But it was acknowledgement. It was memory made into something living. As summer approached, word came that a mining company had made their decision. They'd chosen to develop a site on the far side of the valley, nowhere near Hale's old holdings. All his scheming, all his murder and manipulation had been for nothing. The mineral rights he'd killed for were worthless. "Ironic," Caleb said when they heard the news. "Tragic," Alara corrected. 2 people died for land that wasn't even valuable. All land is valuable to someone who wants it bad enough. That's the problem, isn't it? We forget that land isn't just property. It's where people live, where they build lives, where they bury their dead and plant their futures. They were sitting on their porch, watching the sun set over the valley. The house was finally finished, fully furnished and lived in. The garden was growing. The orchard was planted. Everything they'd fought for was here, real and solid. "Do you ever regret it?" Caleb asked. "Stopping that hanging? Everything that came after?" Alara thought about it. Thought about the fear and exhaustion and nights spent running through the dark. Thought about Margaret's boarding house burning. Thought about watching a little girl testify about the worst night of her life. But she also thought about this porch, this view, this man beside her. Thought about Emma's laughter when she visited. Thought about Marcus and Caleb working side by side, rebuilding what had been broken between them. Thought about a whole town learning that certainty wasn't the same as truth. "No," she said, "I don't regret it. I'd do it again. Even knowing how hard it would be, especially knowing that the hard things are the ones that matter most. That summer, they held a small ceremony for Henry and Martha Whitmore, not a funeral that had happened months ago, but a remembering, a gathering of the people who'd known them, who'd loved them, who wanted to make sure they weren't forgotten. Emma read a poem she'd written about her parents. Helen told stories about Henry's terrible jokes and Martha's even worse cooking. Margaret shared memories of Martha's kindness, the way she'd always had time to listen. Caleb spoke last. I didn't know the Whitmores well. I was up on my mountain, keeping to myself, and I missed the chance to know good neighbors. That's my loss. But I promise you this. The land they loved, the land they died for, it won't be wasted. It'll be cared for, protected. And someday, when Emma's grown and ready, it'll be hers to do with as she sees fit. That's the best memorial I can offer. People cried. People hugged. And when it was over, they shared food and stories and laughter, because that's what the living do. They keep living. As autumn approached again, marking a full year since Alara had stepped forward at the gallows, she discovered she was pregnant. She told Caleb on the porch at sunset, the same place they'd had so many important conversations. He stared at her for a long moment, processing. Then he pulled her close and held on like he'd never let go. Are you scared? He asked. Terrified. Me too. I was terrified when Anna was pregnant, terrified something would happen to her. And then it did, just not the way I feared. I'm not Anna. I know. But I can't help being afraid of losing people I love. It's what I do. Alara pulled back to look at him. Then we'll be afraid together. We'll be terrified and excited and completely unprepared. And we'll figure it out as we go, same as we figured out everything else. When did you get so wise? I'm not wise. I'm just too stubborn to let fear make my decisions anymore. The baby came in late spring, a girl with her mother's eyes and her father's stubborn chin. They named her Anna, for the wife Caleb had lost, and Grace, for the unexpected mercy that had brought Alara and Caleb together. Emma was enchanted with the baby, visiting constantly to hold her and tell her stories. Helen helped with the practical matters, showing Alara how to swaddle and soothe and survive on no sleep. Margaret brought supplies and casseroles and the kind of practical wisdom that came from raising her own children years ago. And Caleb transformed into a father with the same intensity he brought to everything else, protective and worried and completely in love with this small person who'd arrived in their lives like a miracle they hadn't known to ask for. She looks like you, Alara said one night, watching him hold Anna Grace while she slept. She looks like possibility, Caleb said. Like all the things we thought we'd lost but found again. Time passed the way it does, in seasons and cycles. Anna Grace grew. The orchard bore its first apples. The garden flourished. The house settled into its foundation, becoming part of the landscape instead of something imposed upon it. Cedar Hollow changed too. New people moved in. Old grudges faded. The town learned to be a little less certain, a little more willing to question the stories they told themselves. Riley eventually left, unable to live with what he'd almost done. The new marshal was fair and careful, more interested in truth than convenience. Judge Winters visited once a year, checking on how things were developing. She always stayed at Margaret's boarding house, which had been rebuilt and was thriving again. And she always made time to have dinner with Alara and Caleb to see how the family was growing. You two did something remarkable, she said during one visit, when Anna Grace was 3 and running wild through the apple orchard. You changed this whole valley, made it remember that justice means more than vengeance. We just survived, Alara said. No, you did more than survive. You chose to stay when you could have run, chose to fight when you could have hidden, chose to save people who wanted you dead. That's not survival, that's grace. Maybe it was. Alara didn't know anymore where survival ended and grace began. They'd gotten so tangled up in each other, so woven together, that separating them seemed impossible. What she did know was this: she'd stopped running, had found a place and a person and a purpose worth staying for. Had learned that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is stand still and face what's coming. On the 5th anniversary of the day she'd stopped Caleb's hanging, Alara stood on the porch of their house and looked out over land they'd built a life on. The orchard was full and mature now, apples hanging heavy on the branches. The garden was thriving. In the distance, she could see the trees they'd planted for the Whitmores, grown tall enough now to provide shade. Anna Grace was playing in the yard, chasing chickens and laughing. Caleb was in the barn, fixing something that had broken. Normal life, beautiful in its ordinariness. 5 years ago, Alara had been running from a past that hurt too much to remember, had been drifting from town to town with no destination, no purpose, no hope of anything better. And then she'd seen a man on a gallows, about to die for something he didn't do, and she'd made a choice. Stupid and impulsive and completely insane. The choice that had saved them both. She heard Caleb's footsteps on the porch, felt his arms come around her from behind. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "How we got here. How one moment can change everything." "Do you think we were supposed to find each other? That it was meant to be?" "I don't believe in meant to be. I believe in choice. I believe we kept choosing each other over and over, even when it was hard, especially when it was hard. That's what made this real." Anna Grace ran up to the porch, demanding attention. Caleb scooped her up, tossing her in the air until she shrieked with delight. Alara watched them together, her family, her home, her life, and felt something she'd almost forgotten existed. Contentment, not happiness exactly. Life was still hard, still full of struggles and fears and things that could go wrong. But underneath all of that was this solid foundation of belonging, of having earned something worth keeping. As the sun set over the valley, painting everything in gold and shadow, a rider appeared on the path to their house. Alara shaded her eyes, trying to make out who it was. The rider got closer and she recognized him, one of the townspeople, someone who sometimes came to buy vegetables from their garden. "Evening," he called as he approached. "Sorry to bother you so late." "No bother," Caleb said, setting Anna Grace down. "What brings you out here?" "There's a family in town. Just arrived today. They're in trouble running from something back east. The wife's sick and they've got 3 kids. Margaret's trying to help, but her boarding house is full." He looked uncomfortable. "I remembered how you two helped everyone during the fire. Thought maybe you'd know what to do." Alara and Caleb looked at each other. They didn't have extra room, didn't have extra money, had their own family to take care of, their own struggles to manage. But they also remembered what it was like to be desperate and running, remembered what it meant when someone took a chance on you. "Bring them here," Alara said. "We'll figure something out." The rider looked relieved. "Thank you. I'll let them know." After he left, Caleb turned to Alara. "We don't have space for 3 kids and 2 adults. We'll make space, same as we made everything else. You're too kind sometimes. And you're too practical. That's why we work." They went inside to prepare, to make room where there wasn't room, to open their home to strangers who needed help. Anna Grace helped, dragging blankets and pillows with the serious concentration of a child trying to be useful. And later, when the family arrived, tired and scared and grateful beyond words, Alara showed them inside and fed them what she could and made them feel, if not safe, at least less alone. Because that's what she'd learned in the last 5 years. That sometimes salvation comes from the most unexpected places. That grace is often messy and imperfect and doesn't look like you thought it would. And that the bravest thing any of us can do is reach out our hand when someone's falling, even if we're barely standing ourselves. That night, after everyone was settled and the house was finally quiet, Alara stood on the porch one last time. The stars were out, brilliant and infinite. The valley below was dark except for scattered lights. Somewhere out there, Darius Hale sat in a prison cell, living with what he'd done. Somewhere, Emma was growing up with the truth instead of lies. Somewhere, a town was learning to be better than its worst impulses. And here, on this mountain that had once been a place to hide, Alara had found something worth staying for, worth fighting for, worth building a life around. She'd stopped running, had learned to stand still, had discovered that home wasn't a place you found, but a thing you made, piece by piece, choice by choice, day by difficult day. And standing there under the stars with her family sleeping safe inside, Alara Voss, who'd once had nothing but a bag and worn boots and a past she couldn't escape, realized she had everything that mattered. Not because it was easy, not because it was perfect, but because it was real, hard-won, earned through fire and fear and the simple courage of not giving up. The door opened behind her. Caleb emerged, 2 cups of coffee in his hands. He gave her one and stood beside her, shoulder to shoulder, looking out at the night. "Thank you," he said quietly. "For what?" "For stopping. For staying. For being stubborn enough to see something in me worth saving. You did the same for me. We saved each other." They stood in comfortable silence, drinking coffee and watching the stars. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. The family inside would need more help. The garden would need tending. Life would keep demanding and taking and testing them. But tonight, they had this. They had each other. They had a home they'd built from ashes and refusal to quit. And that, Alara thought, was enough. More than enough. It was everything.